Lorraine Carson was hired to scrub floors, not solve equations. But when the black janitor solved a 7-year unsolved math problem during her night shift, the university didn't applaud her. They called security. Within hours, her badge was revoked, her credentials questioned, and a smear campaign ignited. But what they didn't know, she had proof they buried her genius decades ago. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Lorraine Carson moved through the dim hallway of Elmbrook University's science wing, with the quiet precision of someone who had learned to live in the margins of other people's worlds. At 52, her knees ached, her back complained, and the weight of decades spent being overlooked pressed against her shoulders more than any mop bucket ever had. Yet she moved with a rhythm, slow, deliberate, disciplined. After all, invisibility had a rhythm of its own. Most nights were the same. Students rushed out, professors argued in clusters near the stairwell, and no one acknowledged the black janitor pushing a gray cart behind them. Occasionally someone muttered a polite thanks, but most nights she was just an unintended part of the scenery, a fixture, background noise. Tonight felt different though. Even before she reached the lab, the corridor carried a strange kind of tension, something unspoken, a whisper of frustration. Voices drifted from the faculty lounge down the hall. "I'm telling you it's unsolvable," a professor snapped. 7 years and no one has cracked it. Another voice chimed in, irritated. "Let it go. We'll regroup tomorrow. We already wasted 2 hours." Lorraine kept her head low and her steps small. She wasn't supposed to hear their conversations, wasn't supposed to exist in their intellectual atmosphere. She existed in the silence after them, the one they left behind when they finally walked away. As she approached the lab, she heard a third voice, sharper than the others. "Just make sure no unauthorized personnel enter the research wing overnight. That includes staff." The word staff sounded like an accusation rather than a category. Lorraine quietly pushed her cart inside the lab once the footsteps faded. She had cleaned this room 1,000 times, yet every time she stepped inside she felt like an intruder trespassing on ivory tower intelligence. She flicked on the lights. The whiteboard in front of her stretched across the wall like a frozen storm of chalk. Symbols, variable chains, integrals, and geometric notations sprawled across it in frantic strokes. A math puzzle. An equation so dense it looked like someone had tried to trap lightning on the board. Lorraine set down her cleaning cloth slowly. It wasn't the equation that startled her. She had seen hundreds over the years. It was the particular structure, a symmetry hidden inside chaos, a pattern disguised behind misalignments. Something tugged at the back of her mind. Something familiar, like a melody she hadn't heard since childhood. She stepped closer. "This again," she murmured under her breath. Still chasing the wrong variable. Her own voice startled her. She rarely spoke in here. Words didn't belong to her in this room. But the equation called to her in a way she hadn't felt in decades. Not since she was a girl sitting on her bedroom floor with library books instead of toys. She remembered her father's voice, deep and tired from the factory. "Baby numbers are fine, but this world won't give you a fair shot at them." She never believed him until life proved him right. Every scholarship rejected, every counselor who told her to aim for something more realistic. Every application returned with polite refusal. Eventually she stopped trying, swallowed her brilliance, and took the only job that didn't require permission from gatekeepers: custodial work. Yet even now, with a mop in one hand and chalk dust on the floor, she felt the same pull she had felt at 17. She moved her fingers over the chalk tray, hesitating. "This isn't my place," she whispered. "This isn't for me." But the board pulled her all the same. She scanned the clustered symbols again. Someone had overcomplicated the middle segment, introducing unnecessary variables, reversing what should have been a linear progression. The entire right side was almost mocking in its stubbornness. Then she noticed a small note near the top corner: "If unsolved by Friday, project suspended." A faint, humorless smile touched her lips. All that funding, all that pride, and y'all given up by Friday. She knew she shouldn't. She knew she should sweep the chalk dust and leave. She knew the university didn't want someone like her touching their intellectual world, much less contributing to it. But janitors had their own kind of power. The power of being unseen. The power of briefly existing in rooms after everyone else had walked out, leaving their messes and failures behind. She reached for the chalk. Her hand trembled. Not from fear of solving the problem, but from fear of being seen solving it. Slowly, she lifted the small piece of white chalk and moved to the second line of the equation. "You put the anchor in the wrong place," she said softly, her voice steadying. "You're chasing the wrong constant." She wrote the first correction, then another, then another. Her mind flooded with clarity, the kind she had starved for her entire adult life. Everything else faded. The hum of fluorescent lights, the sterile smell of cleaning chemicals, the ache in her knees. All that remained was the puzzle. She whispered under her breath, unraveling each segment step by step. "Shift the axis, reorganize the root, simplify the nested expression. There you go. See? It's not impossible." Her corrections flowed faster. Her handwriting grew sharper. She crossed out the entire right side and rewrote it from scratch. Numbers blossomed beneath her hands like old friends returning home. She didn't hear the soft mechanical hum near the corner of the ceiling. The hidden camera had awakened. She didn't see the red recording light flicker on, capturing her movements with cold efficiency. She had no idea that her small act of reclaimed brilliance was being transmitted to someone who was very much awake at this hour. The equation tightened, resolved, lightened. She stepped back, chest rising. The board was not complete. She hadn't solved the entire thing, but she had cracked open the part that had jammed the entire system. Anyone who saw it would know instantly that this breakthrough was deliberate, structured, intelligent. She looked down at her work, unsure whether to feel proud or terrified. "I shouldn't have done this," she whispered, wiping chalk dust from her fingertips. "They'll think I—" A faint beep interrupted her. She froze. It was coming from the corner, a subtle mechanical chirp she had never heard before. She lifted her eyes carefully toward the ceiling. A dome camera. It wasn't usually active. Custodial staff knew which cameras were real and which were decorative. This wasn't one of the active ones. At least it never had been. But now its tiny internal mechanism whirred, adjusting its angle, pointing directly at her. Her pulse spiked. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Then she heard something far worse than the beat. A soft voice from the hallway, distant but approaching. "Is someone still in the lab?" A man's voice, close enough to hear, close enough to see the chalk on her hands, if he entered the room.
Lorraine panicked.
She dropped the chalk back into the tray, grabbed her cart, and began wiping the nearest counter with frantic motions. Her breath shook. She brushed her clothes, smoothed her shirt, tried to erase any trace of what she had done. Footsteps drew closer. She forced herself to move like she always did. Slow, invisible, unnoticed. Her heart hammered, but her hands resumed their practiced, gentle rhythm of a janitor who was simply doing her job. The doorknob turned. Lorraine lowered her eyes to the floor. The door opened halfway, then stopped. "You left the lights on," the man muttered, his tone cold, irritated. "The labs are supposed to be powered down at night." Lorraine kept wiping the counter. "Sorry, sir. I just came in. I'll turn them off when I'm done." "You're not supposed to be in active research labs," he reminded sharply. "Policies are in place for a reason."
"Yes, sir."
His footsteps lingered for a moment. She felt his gaze scanning the room, but she didn't dare look up. Finally, the door closed. She waited until the hallway went silent again. Her knees shook. Her breath came in uneven bursts. She knew what she had done was dangerous. She knew the board would not believe a janitor could correct a doctoral equation without copying it, cheating, or trespassing. She turned back toward the whiteboard. The chalk-bright corrections glowed under the fluorescent lights. She should erase it. She should make it disappear before morning. She should pretend she had never touched that chalk. But something deep inside her, something she had buried decades ago, refused. "This is the only part of me they can't take," she whispered. She stepped back, just once, just long enough to see herself reflected faintly in the polished metal of the cabinet doors. A janitor, a mathematician, a contradiction the university would never accept. She reached to erase the board. But then, she stopped. A chill crawled down her spine as she noticed something new on the chalk tray. Something she swore hadn't been there when she entered. A small, dark object. A flash drive. No logo. No label. Placed exactly where she had been standing while solving the equation. Her breath vanished. Someone hadn't just seen her. Someone had left her something. And someone wanted her to know it. Lorraine lifted the mysterious flash drive with trembling fingers, unaware that at that very moment, the hidden camera's live feed was being watched from an office across campus, and the person watching her whispered, So she really did it. The flash drive in Lorraine's trembling hand felt heavier than metal. She had barely slept after leaving the lab, mind spiraling with questions she had no one to ask. She replayed the earlier moments again and again. The equation, the corrections, the shifting camera, the footsteps, and that small object, left like a quiet warning or invitation. She knew trouble had been awakened, but she did not know how quickly it would arrive. By sunrise, the trouble was not just awake, it was roaring. Across campus, in the mathematics department's windowed conference room, a cluster of professors crowded around a laptop. Their faces were drawn tight, eyes narrowed, jaws clenched. The footage, grainy yet undeniable, played on loop. Lorraine standing at the board. Lorraine writing. Lorraine correcting. Lorraine wiping chalk dust from her fingers with the innocent, instinctive grace of someone who had solved problems in private her entire life. The silence in the room was suffocating. Then Dr. Kelman, the department chair, slammed his palm against the table. "This is impossible," he snapped, his voice trembling with something sharper than anger. Humiliation. Beside him, Dr. Howard leaned back, arms folded. Someone tampered with the footage. "There's no way, a janitor." Kelman cut him off with a bitter, almost panicked laugh. "A janitor? A woman with no academic record? No published research? No mathematical background? No access clearance? And we're supposed to believe she walked in and what? Solved the part none of us could in 7 years." Dr. Vale, the youngest faculty member, pushed her glasses up nervously. "She didn't solve all of it, just the central bottleneck." She pointed at the whiteboard on the paused frame. "And from what I can see, she didn't just guess. She reorganized the expression. Cleanly. Elegantly." She hesitated. "Correctly." Kelman's jaw tightened so hard the muscles quivered. That equation was used for grant proposals, publications, careers, he said, through clenched teeth. "You think I'm going to let the world believe a janitor outsmarted an entire department?" The room fell into an uncomfortable hush. Finally, Dr. Howard leaned forward. "Maybe the real question is, how did she even get into the lab at night?" Another voice chimed in from the back. Dr. Reddick, always eager to deflect blame. "Exactly. Custodial staff aren't allowed in active research zones after hours. She had no authorization. She shouldn't have been anywhere near that board." "Unfertilizer." Kelman repeated the word like a weapon he was polishing. "Exactly." The implication hovered in the room like a thick fog. They would not blame themselves for failing. They would blame her for succeeding. Meanwhile, in the custodial break room at the edge of campus, Lorraine sat on a metal chair that wobbled whenever she shifted her weight. She clasped the flash drive inside her jacket pocket, her fingers brushing against it for reassurance or warning. She still couldn't. Her supervisor, Mark, glanced at her with a frown. "You're quiet today," he said gently. Lorraine attempted a smile, but it faltered. "Long night. Just tired." "Tired looks different on most folks," Mark replied. "You look like you're waiting for something to fall out of the sky." She didn't respond. How could she explain that something had already fallen? That a single moment of curiosity had cracked open an entire system that was never meant to acknowledge her? A knock sounded on the door. Sharp. Cold. Mark walked over, expecting a delivery or routine check-in. But when he opened the door, an unfamiliar man in a navy blazer stood there, gold badge clipped to his belt. "Facilities manager?" he asked briskly. "That's me," Mark replied, confused. "I'm looking for Lorraine Carson." Lorraine stiffened. The man's eyes snapped toward her. "You need to come with me." Mark took a protective half-step forward. "She hasn't done anything wrong." "That's not for you to decide," the man replied. "Department head requested immediate review." Lorraine felt her stomach twist. "Review for what?" she asked quietly. The man's expression cooled even further. "For unauthorized access to a restricted laboratory." Mark's mouth fell open. "Unauthorized?" "She cleans that wing every night." "Not research zones," the man corrected. "They're off limits without direct faculty permission." Lorraine swallowed hard. "I didn't go in to do anything wrong. I was just—" He raised a hand. "Save it. Bring your ID and come along." The shame burned hotter than the fear. She stood slowly, feeling every gaze of every custodian in the room on her. Not accusing, worried, protective. But they couldn't shield her from a storm like this. Not one built entirely around the color of her skin and the assumptions tied to it. As she followed the man out, Mark grabbed her elbow gently. "You want me to call someone? Union rep? Anyone?" Lorraine shook her head. Let me see what this is first. But she knew. Deep down she knew. It wasn't about the lab. It was about who they believed belonged in a room filled with equations. The math department's conference room buzzed with agitation when Lorraine was escorted inside. A half-circle of professors stared at her with thinly disguised contempt, disbelief or something worse, insecurity. Kelman stood, with arms crossed. "Miss Carson," he began coldly, "you were recorded inside the lab last night." Lorraine kept her eyes low. "I clean that building every night." "Not that room," Kelman snapped. "That is an active research environment. Access requires clearance." Lorraine felt the sting, but kept her voice steady. "No one ever told me that room was off limits." Kelman's lips curled. "We don't expect janitors to understand our facility policies." The words struck like a slap. She felt heat rise in her chest but forced herself to breathe slowly. "Sir, I wasn't trying to break rules. I just—" "You wrote on the whiteboard," Dr. Howard interrupted. "Care to explain why?" Silence filled the room. Lorraine felt all eyes sharpening like blades. She realized then that the corrections she wrote were not just marks of insight. They were marks of trespass. "I was cleaning," she said finally. "I noticed the equation. Something caught my eye, and I made a few corrections. That's all." "A few corrections?" Kelman's laugh felt like broken glass. "You rewrote the structural core of a 7-year research equation." Lorraine opened her mouth. But he stepped closer. "Are we supposed to believe you understood it? A woman with no degree, no math training, no academic background?" "I never said I didn't understand it," Lorraine replied softly. A stunned silence washed through the room. Kelman's voice dropped to a low, dangerous register. "Who fed you the solution?" "No one," she answered immediately. "Did you bring a cheat sheet? Did you steal departmental notes? Did you download confidential material?" "No." "Then explain," he pressed. "How a janitor solved what 5 doctoral candidates could not." She met his gaze finally. "I've studied math my whole life. Not in your classrooms, but in my own time." Kelman scoffed loudly. "Self-taught genius, is that it? How convenient." Dr. Vale interjected quietly. Her corrections weren't random. They were insightful. Kelman turned on her with a glare. "Are you defending this?" "I'm saying facts are facts." "Well, here's a fact," he shot back. "She accessed a restricted space, interfered with research material, and tampered with intellectual property she had no right to even look at." The room filled again with murmurs. Lorraine felt her throat tighten. "I didn't mean harm." Coleman held out a printed form. "We've already contacted the university's legal office. They'll determine whether this is grounds for disciplinary action, termination, or a potential criminal inquiry." The dizziness hit her so fast she had to steady herself on the chair. "Criminal?" she whispered. "You altered federally funded research data," he said. "There are consequences." Dr. Howard leaned back, smirking. "Next time, stick to mopping." The words shattered something inside her. Something that had managed, even after decades of insult and invisibility, to remain intact. She swallowed hard. "This is happening because I'm black," she said quietly. The room froze. Kelman stiffened. "Excuse me? You wouldn't question a student like this? Or a professor?" she continued, voice trembling yet unwavering. "But a black janitor? A woman whose name you never bothered to learn? Suddenly it's impossible. Suddenly it's criminal." "That's a serious accusation," Dr. Reddick muttered. "It's not an accusation," she replied. "It's what's happening." Kelman's jaw clenched. "Remove her from campus until further notice." The man in the navy blazer stepped closer, ready to escort her out. But then, an unexpected voice sliced through the room. "Wait!" Everyone turned. Dr. Vale stood, pale, shaking, a laptop in her hands. "There's something you all need to see," she said. Kelman frowned. This is not the time. But she wasn't listening to him. She plugged the laptop into the projector. The screen flickered. Then the room went dead silent. It was the security footage, but not the same clip they had reviewed earlier. This was longer. At the end of the recording, long after Lorraine had left, a shadowy figure entered the lab. Someone wearing a faculty ID badge. Someone who walked straight to the board, stared at Lorraine's corrections, and then smiled. Kelman's face drained of color. Dr. Vale turned to the room, her voice trembling. "This version of the footage wasn't sent to the department. It was sent to me privately. Someone didn't want you to see it." Lorraine's breath caught. This was the twist no one expected. The man in the recording had erased the timestamp. And he wasn't a janitor. He wasn't unauthorized. He was faculty. As the professors argued in shock, the door swung open, and the university's legal counsel stepped inside, holding a thick file with Lorraine's name stamped across the front. "We need to speak with her immediately," she announced. "The investigation is officially underway." The room had barely absorbed the shock of the extended security footage when the door swung open and the university's legal counsel stepped inside. A slim woman in a charcoal suit, her expression sharp enough to cut through concrete, carried a thick file brimming with documents. Lorraine's name flashed across the binder in bold, unforgiving print. "We need Miss Carson," she said, voice crisp and practiced, as though this moment had been rehearsed behind closed doors. "A formal hearing is being convened immediately." Lorraine felt every muscle in her body stiffen. She glanced toward Dr. Vale, the only person in the room who had shown even a sliver of fairness. Vale gave her a look full of apology, maybe even fear, but said nothing. Around them the faculty whispered in tense fragments, their voices a mixture of denial, irritation and something darker, the fear of looking inferior. The legal counsel stepped closer. "Miss Carson, please come with me." Even the agent from campus security seemed unsure how to react. He had escorted her here like a suspect. Now the room itself buzzed with uncertainty, like everyone had stepped into a deeper, messier story than the one they thought they were telling. Lorraine swallowed hard. "Do I have a choice?" "No," the counsel replied. "You're required to attend." The word required hit her chest with the weight of a verdict already decided. She followed the woman out of the room, past the gawking faculty, past the uneasy silence that followed her footsteps. Her palms felt damp, and she clutched her jacket as though it held the last piece of her dignity. Outside, the hallway lights flickered slightly. The counsel's heels clicked sharply. As she walked ahead, Lorraine's steps trailed behind her. Slower, heavier. "Where are we going?" Lorraine asked. "To the Academic Conduct Board," the woman said. "You will have an opportunity to present your side." Lorraine almost laughed at the cruelty of the phrasing. Your side. As if her side of the story had ever mattered in places like this. The hearing room felt less like a place for truth, and more like a courtroom designed by people who had never been on the other side of power. A long mahogany table split the space in half. On one side sat a panel of 5 administrators, stone-faced, rigid, evaluating her before she even sat down. On the other side sat a lone chair, Lorraine's chair. All eyes shifted to her when she entered, some curious, some cold, others openly irritated, as though her presence here was an inconvenience. The chair of the board, an older white woman named Dean Hollister, cleared her throat. "Miss Carson, please be seated." Lorraine sat slowly. The room smelled of old books and polished wood, the kind of space that felt deliberately designed to intimidate. Hollister folded her hands. "You are here due to a potential breach of university protocol, specifically unauthorized activity in a research laboratory and interference with academic materials." Lorraine felt the words wrap around her like a noose. "I was doing my job," she said softly. "I clean that building every night." Hollister nodded, with polite, distant disinterest. "We understand you have routine custodial duties, but surveillance shows you handled sensitive research work." "I didn't think the whiteboard was," Lorraine began. A man on the panel cut her off. "It doesn't matter what you thought." The coldness of his tone stung. Lorraine forced herself not to react. Hollister continued, "Before we proceed, is there anything you would like to state for the record?" Lorraine inhaled deeply. She hadn't prepared. She hadn't even known she would be called into something like this. But honesty was all she had. "I've loved numbers my whole life," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I grew up solving whatever math books I could find. I wanted to study it. I wanted more than anything to become a mathematician." One of the panelists raised an eyebrow. Lorraine continued, "But the school I went to had no advanced classes for students like me. My counselor said college wasn't a realistic goal. And when I applied years later, I was rejected because of limited academic alignment. I worked to support my family. I never stopped learning, but I never got the chance to study formally." A few members shifted in their seats, uneasy though not from sympathy. Her words bored into places they didn't want examined. "I saw the equation on the board," she said. "It wasn't part of my job, but it called to me. I saw something in it I recognized. I made some corrections because the mistake was obvious to me. That's all." The panel was silent, considering her. Finally, one of them, A man with thin silver hair and an expression carved from granite leaned forward. So you're suggesting you solved part of a problem our faculty could not solve in 7 years? His tone wasn't curious. It was mocking. Lorraine held his gaze. I didn't solve it. I corrected something. And you expect us to believe this? He countered. I'm not asking you to believe anything, she replied. I'm telling you what happened. Another panelist shook her head. This could easily be coincidence. A random scribble that happened to align with a known pattern. Lorraine blinked, startled. Coincidence? I rewrote the center structure. The panelist lifted her eyebrows. And that's precisely what concerns us. A custodial employee managing to perform doctoral-level mathematical analysis. It raises questions. Lorraine felt her throat tighten. Questions about what? The silver-haired man answered for everyone. About motive. Motive. The word sliced her open. What motive would I have? Lorraine whispered. You tell us. Another panelist said. Perhaps to gain attention, employment leverage, or perhaps you saw confidential research and attempted to replicate it without permission. Lorraine felt the heat behind her eyes. I didn't replicate anything. I didn't even know what your research was. Hollister finally spoke again. Ms. Carson, the university is responsible for the integrity of its research. An unauthorized correction, intentional or not, could jeopardize funding, publications, and departmental credibility. There it was. Their real fear. Not the breach. The humiliation. Lorraine exhaled shakily. I understand what this looks like, but I didn't go in there trying to undermine anyone. I just overstepped, the silver-haired man said. No, Lorraine replied. I saw a mistake, and I corrected it. And that, he said sharply, is the problem. The room went silent. He leaned back, satisfied with himself. A janitor performing high-level mathematics disrupts credibility. It gives the public reason to question our standards. Hollister cleared her throat, but didn't disagree. Lorraine felt as if the floor beneath her was melting. So the issue isn't what I did. It's who I am. Another strained silence. No one contradicted her. Finally, Hollister spoke. We must determine whether your actions constitute a breach of policy. Based on preliminary review, the board finds cause for concern. Lorraine folded her hands tightly. I didn't hurt anyone. The panelist with the clipped tone replied, this isn't about harm, it's about trust. Trust. She felt the word like a bruise forming. Hollister lifted a document. Effective immediately, your campus access credentials will be suspended pending a full investigation. You will be placed on administrative leave. Lorraine's breath caught in her chest. Leave? Without pay, without security, without warning. She could feel the consequences cascading before they were even spoken. Rent, food, bills, medicine, everything balanced on a salary that barely sustained her. Please, Lorraine whispered, her voice cracking despite her effort to hold it together. My job is the only. This decision is final, Hollister said firmly. But I didn't commit a crime, Lorraine said. You accessed a research zone you were not authorized to enter, Hollister replied, unmoved. That alone is grounds for suspension. The mathematical interference is an additional matter under review. Tears threatened the edges of Lorraine's composure, but she forced them back. I didn't interfere, she said softly. I contributed. This time Hollister's expression hardened. You were not asked to contribute. The truth of it hit like a blow. They didn't want her brilliance. They wanted her compliance. They wanted her invisible. The legal counsel stood. Miss Carson, you'll surrender your badge at the door. Lorraine rose on shaky legs. I've worked here 15 years, she said quietly. Never been late. Never caused trouble. And this is how you treat me? Hollister avoided her eyes. We treat all policy violations the same. But they didn't. And everyone in the room knew it. Lorraine turned toward the door, her chest heavy enough to collapse. The counsel followed her out, walking briskly while Lorraine moved like she carried an entire lifetime of swallowed potential on her back. At the exit, the counsel held out her hand. Your badge, Miss Carson. Lorraine stared at the small plastic card. The picture wasn't flattering, but it was proof she belonged somewhere, even in the smallest way. She pressed it into the woman's palm. The click of the plastic snapping away from her hand felt like the shutting of a cell door. Investigation begins immediately, the counsel said. We will contact you. Lorraine stepped outside. Cold air wrapped around her like a reminder of what waited beyond these walls. Bills, uncertainty, fear. She took one step, then another. Behind her, Inside the building she could no longer enter. Faculty members whispered in hallways. Somewhere someone replayed the footage. Somewhere else, someone erased timestamps. Somewhere deeper, an entire institution tightened its grip to silence an inconvenient truth. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. A low voice spoke urgently. Miss Carson, you need to know something. The investigation isn't about what you did. It's about what you exposed. Lorraine froze. Before she could respond, the line went to dead. She lowered the phone slowly. Just as a campus-wide security alert flashed across her screen. Access revoked. Lorraine Carson. Immediate report if seen near research facilities. Lorraine sat in the cracked vinyl chair of her small apartment kitchen. The soft hum of the fridge, the only sound cutting through the silence. Her phone screen lit up with the campus alert once more. Access revoked. Her name now carried the weight of a warning, instead of the message made her fingers shake. She had already lost her badge, her job, and if the hearing panel had their way, her right to exist inside any academic space. The anonymous phone call haunted her. The investigation isn't about what you did. It's about what you exposed. But she had no idea what she had exposed, or who felt threatened enough to hide it behind a veil of policies and procedures. Then the first message arrived. It was from Amber, a freshman intern in the computer science department. Someone Lorraine had helped more than once when she was lost in the hallways at night. Lorraine had given her directions, once fixed the handle on her dorm room's bathroom door, even brought her aspirin when she saw her crying in the stairwell. Amber's message was short, almost cryptic. You didn't hear it from me. But watch Twitter. Watch now. Lorraine blinked, unsure whether to feel alarmed or hopeful. She opened her browser and typed in her name. The first thing that appeared was a grainy screenshot. Her hand raised to the chalkboard, her posture focused, calm, completely unaware she was being recorded. The full footage followed in the next link. 10 minutes. No sound. Just a janitor solving a math problem, fluidly, fearlessly, while chalk dust floated in the air like fragments of a long-forgotten dream. Her gestures were deliberate, her steps steady, her corrections elegant, and the silence in the room made it even more powerful. She watched herself work like a ghost watching her past. Then she noticed the retweet count. Thousands. Then tens of thousands. Then hundreds of thousands. The video was going viral. By the 36th hour, it had racked up 2.4 million views. The hashtags exploded, like wildfire. Genius janitor. Let her teach. Racism in academia. Olmbrook, cover-up. Black women do math too. A clip of her whispering, "You're chasing the wrong constant," had been slowed down and subtitled over a cinematic music track. That segment alone became its own movement. Young women of color began posting side-by-side videos of themselves solving equations with that quote echoing in the background. People wrote poetry about her chalk marks. Artists sketched her silhouette at the whiteboard with stars behind her instead of math. And yet, inside the walls of Elmbrook University, the temperature only dropped further. Dr. Kelman stood in the boardroom with a digital printout of Twitter's trending topics in hand. Jaw clenched. "This is spiraling," he growled. The university president, a well-tailored man named Gerard Maddox, paced slowly at the window. "We need to control the narrative. She's turning into a symbol," Kelman snapped. "And we're the villains." Maddox sighed. "Symbols can be managed. We've done it before. We deny, we redirect, we reframe." Dr. Howard muttered. "We can't deny it happened. The footage is real." "Then we reframe it," Maddox said coldly. "Make it about security breaches, about the dangers of viral misinformation. Do not, under any circumstance, mention her name in any official capacity." Kelman nodded, a bitter glint in his eye. "We make the story about protocol, not people." A draft statement was circulated within the hour. It read like a politician's apology without the apology. "The university is aware of a recent viral video depicting an unauthorized individual inside a research facility. We are currently reviewing our internal access protocols to ensure such breaches do not occur again. We remain committed to maintaining academic integrity and institutional security. We remain committed to maintaining academic integrity and institutional security." Nowhere in the statement was Lorraine Carson mentioned. Not her name, not her job, not her contribution. To the world she was a symbol of triumph. To the university she was a liability being surgically erased. Lorraine read the statement on her phone, each word like a slap to her face. Her inbox had flooded with interview requests, job offers, speaking invites. But the only institution that had ever employed her remained silent. She was becoming famous, but not protected. People online called her brilliant, but in real life, she was still without income, still facing legal threats, still waking up with a racing heart, and no idea if she'd ever work again. She hadn't left her apartment in 2 days. Then the second message arrived. This one wasn't from Amber. It was from a burner email account. No name, no introduction, just a PDF and a message. They've hired someone. A consultant with deep pockets. His job is to prove you cheated. Lorraine opened the PDF. It was a press release draft. A well-known data science firm, partially funded by private tech investors, was offering a $100,000 reward for verifiable evidence that Lorraine's solution had been pre-written, copied from an AI engine, or fabricated using generative math tools. They called it academic fraud detection. The headline was slick. Veritas Initiative launches transparency campaign. After viral academic scandal. Lorraine dropped the phone. They weren't just trying to silence her now. They were trying to erase her genius through technology. A knock sounded at her door. She froze. When she opened it cautiously, a small envelope had been slipped through the mail slot. Inside was a printed news clipping. Elmbrook University retains outside experts to investigate breach. No signature, no note, just a highlight on one paragraph. A third-party algorithm specialist will attempt to determine if the solution written by the unnamed individual could have originated from a known generative AI engine or pre-saved models. She couldn't breathe. They weren't just attacking her name. They were questioning the very idea that a black woman could think that deeply without help. That night, a panel of cable news commentators debated her. She's a hero, one said. An example of overlooked brilliance. But we don't know her background, another argued. There could be fraud involved. It wouldn't be the first time. She doesn't even have a degree, someone added. Should we really be glorifying someone who broke into a lab? Lorraine watched in silence, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She whispered to herself, I didn't break in, I cleaned it. Her voice shook with the exhaustion of constantly defending her humanity. Then her phone buzzed again. A new message. This one from Amber. There's something else. I'm scared to tell you over text. But it's about the whiteboard. It wasn't what they say it was. Lorraine's eyes widened. She called Amber instantly, heart racing. The line clicked. Amber answered, whispering. The board wasn't just for math. Lorraine, that equation, it was part of a government-funded project. Predictive algorithm work. Machine learning models tied to something bigger. Your correction? It wasn't theoretical. It changed real variables in a project tied to military grants. Lorraine staggered back into her kitchen chair. What? Amber's voice trembled. You didn't just solve a math puzzle. You altered an output chain that could affect national-level modeling. But I didn't know, Lorraine whispered. I know, Amber said. But they're scared because if what you did holds up under scrutiny, they'll have to admit someone without a degree outsmarted federally funded scientists. And if it doesn't, they'll bury you. Lorraine's hands trembled. Why tell me this? Amber hesitated. Because I think someone's going to come after your notes next. You wrote things down before, right? I saw you that night. You were holding something. Lorraine's breath caught. Her notebooks. The ones under her bed, filled with decades of math, scribbles, corrections. They were the only proof that this gift wasn't an accident. The line went quiet again. Then Amber added, they're not going to stop with the video. That reward money? Someone's going to try and manufacture proof that you cheated. If they discredit you now, no one will remember what really happened. Lorraine stared out the window, her reflection staring back with silent intensity. She had thought going viral would change things. Instead, it had made her more dangerous. As she raced to check her notebooks, she found the box under her bed already open. Pages missing, the corners torn, and a single card left in their place. Typed in block letters. You should have stayed in your place. The air inside Lorraine's tiny apartment felt heavier than it ever had. The card lying on the floor, you should have stayed in your place, still burned in her mind like a warning carved into her nerves. Someone had been inside her home, inside her bedroom, inside the private world she had guarded for decades. And worst of all, they had touched her notebooks, her equations, her memory, her receipts. She knelt on the floor, fingers trembling. As she sifted through the disheveled box, papers lay scattered in a way that felt both methodical and chaotic. The kind of search performed by someone looking for something specific, but willing to destroy everything around it to find it. Several pages were missing. Her handwriting, the loops, the angled letters, the deeply pressed pencil marks, was interrupted in places like pieces ripped from her identity. She lifted a torn fragment. It was one of her earliest attempts at differential modeling, written when she was barely 20. She had worked on that page when she was living in her aunt's cramped attic, hiding her passion from relatives who believed math was a waste of time for women like her. Gone. Someone had stolen parts of her life. The room felt colder. The noise from the street sounded distant. She inhaled shakily, fighting against the feeling of being hunted. Then her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Check your email. Her chest tightened, but she opened her inbox anyway. A forwarded message sat at the top. The subject line read, "Local journalists request interview regarding Elmbrook admissions files, 1992. She opened it. Two journalists, Daniel Avery and Sienna Clark, were requesting a meeting. Their message was carefully worded, formal, but the curiosity beneath it was unmistakable. We've discovered inconsistencies in Elmbrook's admissions decisions from the early 1990s. Your application file appears to have been flagged internally before rejection. We believe this is relevant to current events." Lorraine's breath slowed. She read the line again. Flagged internally. Her heart knocked against her ribs. For 30 years she had carried the belief, no, the shame, that she simply hadn't been good enough for Elmbrook. She had always explained the rejection to herself with humility. Maybe her high school hadn't prepared her. Maybe she didn't write her essay well. Maybe her dreams had simply been too big. But flagged internally? What did that even mean? Her phone buzzed again. A second message from the same unknown number appeared. Meet them. It's time your story was told. No name. No signature. Just that. Lorraine pulled her knees to her chest. The fear felt real and immense. But beneath it, a flicker of stubborn defiance rose. They had broken into her home. They had tried to erase her work. They wanted the world to doubt her. But she still had something they couldn't steal. She had pages. Hundreds of them. Decades of equations in her own hand. In her own voice. Built across years of nights when the world assumed she slept without ambition. She picked up a notebook near the bottom of the mess. Its cover was bent, corners worn, pages yellowed. Inside it, scribbles filled every inch. Symbols curled and spiraled in her handwriting, each line holding the weight of memory. Questions she asked herself when no one else cared. She whispered softly, "I kept everything. You don't get to take that from me." She grabbed the rest of the notebooks, the pink ones from the early 2000s, the thick black-bound journals from her 30s, the spiral notebooks from her 40s, where the ink faded in places from water dripping onto the pages during her night shifts. This was her real story, the one no university had cared to hear. Later that afternoon, she met journalists Daniel and Sienna at a quiet cafe near campus. The small bell above the door jingled as she stepped in. Both journalists stood immediately. "Miss Carson," Daniel said, extending a hand. He was in his late 40s, with sharp eyes softened by empathy. "Thank you for coming. We know this must be overwhelming," Sienna added. "We appreciate your courage." Lorraine sat across from them, setting one of her battered notebooks gently on the table as though she were placing a piece of her soul between them. "What did you find?" she asked. Daniel exchanged a glance with Sienna before pulling out a thin folder. "We requested archived admissions records from Elmbrook," he explained. "The university resisted, but legally they're required to release files older than 25 years. He slid a yellowed document toward her. Lorraine's breath faltered. Her handwriting stared back at her. The signature she had written at 20. The essay she remembered sweating over. The grades she had worked for while juggling jobs and family. Daniel pointed to a red stamp on the form. It wasn't one she had ever seen. "Flagged special review required." She frowned. "What does that mean?" Sienna leaned forward. Back in the early 90s, Elmbrook had an internal review system. Students from certain neighborhoods or high schools were placed under an extra filter. "Extra filter?" Lorraine repeated softly. Daniel nodded. "Yes. Students of color were disproportionately flagged under this system." The words landed like bricks inside her chest. Sienna continued. "Your file shows strong math marks, above average in standardized testing, excellent letters of recommendation. But once flagged, your application went to a different committee, one that operated on fit rather than merit." Lorraine felt heat rising in her face. So, I didn't get rejected because I wasn't good enough. Daniel shook his head. You were rejected because they never intended to let students like you into the math program. Her hands trembled on the table. Decades of self-blame cracked. Decades of swallowed dreams, loose. Decades of believing she had failed, when the truth was that the system had failed her. Hit with brutal clarity. I spent years thinking I just wasn't smart enough, she whispered. Sienna's voice softened. You were more than smart enough. You were targeted. Lorraine looked away, blinking back tears she refused to shed in public. Why are you telling me this now? Daniel folded his hands. Because your story is bigger than one night in a lab. People deserve to know what you've been up against your entire life. But more importantly, there's someone else who wants to speak with you. Lorraine stiffened. Who? A retired professor, Daniel said. He used to serve on that special review committee. He reached out to us after the video went viral. He remembers your application. Lorraine's eyes widened. What did he say? Daniel hesitated, choosing his words carefully. He regrets what he did. He said he has something, documents he kept from that era, letters, notes, internal memos. He wants to give them to you. Sienna added. He said your rejection wasn't random. It was debated. And he kept the paperwork because it never sat right with him. Lorraine felt her throat tighten. He kept them? For 30 years? He said he always wondered what became of you. Sienna replied. He wants to meet tomorrow. Lorraine sat in stunned silence. Her notebooks, the viral video, the investigation, and now a man from the past stepping forward with proof she never knew existed. What's his name? She asked. Dr. Ernest Mallory, Daniel said. He retired 15 years ago. Leaves alone now. He sounded shaken. He said he's been afraid to speak, but the video convinced him he couldn't stay silent. Something in Lorraine's chest softened. A lifetime of hurt still pulsed inside her, but for once a piece of truth was reaching her from a place she least expected. She whispered, I want to meet him. Daniel nodded. We'll arrange it. They stood to leave, but Lorraine remained seated a moment longer. She ran her fingers across the battered notebooks she had brought. Pages filled with persistence. Pages filled with brilliance. Pages of the dream she never let die. For the first time in days, she felt a fragile sense of grounding. They can try to rewrite my story, she murmured, but I have the real one right here. That evening, Daniel called again. Mallory confirmed. Tomorrow morning at his home. Lorraine felt a pulse of nervous hope. Thank you. Rest tonight, he said gently. Tomorrow might be heavy. But tomorrow never came the way they planned. At 6:42 the next morning, Lorraine woke to her phone ringing violently. She answered groggily, her voice thick with sleep. Hello? Daniel's voice erupted through the line. Tight, breathless, shaken. Lorraine, there's been a break-in. She shot upright. Where? At Mallory's house. Her heart plummeted. Is he? We don't know, Daniel said, voice cracking. The police are there now. The door was forced open. His study was ransacked. The box of letters he told us about, it's gone. The room spun around her. Gone? She whispered. Yes. And Mallory, we can't find him. Her pulse roared in her ears. Daniel continued. This wasn't random, Lorraine. Someone knew exactly what he planned to give you. Lorraine's voice trembled. Someone is trying to erase the past. And they're getting bolder, Daniel said. We need to be careful. As his words echoed through the silence, Lorraine looked toward her window. For the first time, she noticed a car she didn't recognize parked across the street. Engine running, lights off, watching. As she moved toward the window, her phone buzzed with a new text from an unknown number. You weren't the only one we silenced. The car idling across the street didn't move. Its windows remained fogged by the November cold, the engine purring like a predator too patient to pounce. Lorraine stood behind the curtain, barely breathing, her phone still glowing with the message that turned her blood to ice. You weren't the only one we silenced. She stepped back slowly, letting the fabric fall. Something in her gut told her it wasn't just a threat. It was a fact. There were others' names buried, voices lost, perhaps long before her story reached a blackboard. The silence in her apartment grew thick. She sat down at the table, her fingers clutching the same notebook she'd been gripping for hours. Her own handwriting stared back at her. Loops, numbers, unfinished theories that had lived inside her since childhood. Her brilliance hadn't bloomed overnight. It had survived in secret. Her mind drifted back, unwillingly at first, then with a wave of ache that swallowed her whole. Lorraine was 15 when her geometry teacher, Mr. Preston, first refused to grade her test. She had solved every problem using a method from a textbook he hadn't taught from, one she borrowed from the library downtown, because the one at her school only carried outdated, torn editions. "This isn't the method I instructed," he had said, circling her paper in red. "But it's correct," she'd replied, gently. "That's not the point," he snapped. "You need to follow directions." She had walked home in silence that day, clutching a perfect paper with a big red 0. That night she stayed up, solving every problem again, this time using his method, just to prove she could. She handed it in the next day without a word. He marked it with a... It was the first time she learned that being right wasn't enough. By the time she reached senior year, she had scored higher on the state math exam than anyone else at her school. But when she tried to enroll in the AP calculus class, the counselor frowned. "That class is rigorous, Lorraine. You'll feel out of place," she said kindly. "Besides, colleges will consider you for diversity slots regardless." Lorraine blinked. "I'm not looking for a slot. I'm looking for opportunity." The counselor smiled with practiced pity. "Sometimes we have to be realistic, sweetheart." She walked away holding the rejection slip in her hand. She remembered staring at it for hours that night, until the streetlights blinked on, and her mother called her for dinner. "You'll have to be twice as good, baby," her mother said while stirring rice over the stove. "And even then they might not see you." Lorraine didn't cry. She wrote equations in the condensation on the kitchen window instead, numbers forming shapes in the glass until they dissolved. At 18 she applied to 5 colleges. All rejections. One cited insufficient social compatibility. Another said her curriculum lacked academic rigor. 2 others offered no reason at all. Elmbrook had been her top choice. The rejection came in a plain envelope, with a single paragraph inside. She remembered sitting on the porch that evening, holding the letter in her lap as the sun dipped behind the trees. Her aunt glanced at her, tired from work. "Don't let that break you," she said. "They don't know who they're turning down." But Lorraine felt something inside her collapse. Not her dream. Her identity. Because when a system tells you no repeatedly, it doesn't just take your options, it takes your sense of worth. Still, she didn't give up entirely. She found jobs cleaning offices, organizing shelves at a bookstore, waiting tables on weekends. And every night, she opened library books, math books, physics books, algorithms she didn't fully understand but refused to stop reading. She taught herself calculus by copying proofs from a stolen MIT syllabus she found printed in a discarded journal. She solved practice problems late into the night, using empty pizza boxes when she couldn't afford more notebooks. She mailed herself equations through certified mail, so the dates could prove she'd done the work, just in case she ever needed to prove her originality. She had been building her mind in the dark, piece by piece, year after year, but no one ever asked. No one ever looked. The world gave her a mop and said, "Be grateful you're here at all." So she cleaned their hallways, and kept her brilliance tucked beneath her ribs. Now in her kitchen, the memory of those years gripped her like a vice. Her notebooks were not just paper. They were evidence of effort, of capacity, of the injustice that followed her like a second shadow. But even her proof was now under attack. Her phone dinged again. This time it was Daniel, the journalist. The message was brief, urgent. "We need to talk." The contents of Mallory's box just surfaced on the dark web. Lorraine's eyes widened. She called immediately. "What do you mean surfaced?" Daniel's voice was low, furious. "Someone leaked scanned files from the box. But they've been redacted." "Redacted how?" "Your name is blacked out in all correspondence. Memos you were mentioned in are missing entire paragraphs. And worst of all, someone's labeled the files with discrediting tags, false credentials, unverified claims, questionable intent." Lorraine stood up, pacing. "But they were real." He said he had the originals. "They were real. But the version online? It's a smear job." She felt the walls of the room begin to shrink around her. "They're trying to rewrite my past," she said quietly. "Yes," Daniel confirmed. "And they're trying to get ahead of the story. If the public sees these first, any future revelation from us could be dismissed." Lorraine closed her eyes. "Is Mallory?" "No word. Police are treating him as missing, not harmed. But the timing, his silence, it's not coincidence." Lorraine's hands clenched. "Can we prove the leaks are altered?" "We're trying." But without the originals, we're stuck. She hung up and sat down slowly. Her knees ached, her breath shallow. The air felt thick with betrayal. They had not just taken her chance. They were trying to erase her presence entirely. Not just from academia, but from history. And yet they didn't know she had kept copies of her own. Not just notebooks, letters, notes, rejected essay drafts. Even the original Elmbrook rejection letter, still folded inside the same envelope. She walked to her closet and reached into the lining of an old suitcase. Inside it, a smaller envelope filled with what she once called her defeat file. Now, it was something else entirely. Proof. She opened it with shaking hand. Inside, a carbon copy of a recommendation letter from her senior math teacher, praising her unusual and gifted intuition with abstract concepts. A second letter from a local librarian, noting how often Lorraine borrowed advanced mathematics books, and how she solved equations well beyond grade level. And at the bottom, a crumpled rejection letter from Elmbrook. But someone had written a note in the margin in red ink. She'd never noticed it before. Strong scores, but a difficult fit. Keep under watch. Her eyes locked onto the words. Her hands tightened around the paper. There it was. Proof she'd been watched, flagged before she even got through the door. Later that night, she uploaded scanned copies of her journals, dated, signed, watermarked, and sent them to Daniel and Sienna. Send it to every news outlet you trust, she wrote. No edits, no delays. She attached a note at the end of her email. They can forge fake versions of my story, but they forgot I kept the truth for myself on paper, in ink before any camera watched. They thought erasing me would be easy, but I've been writing myself back into history for 30 years. Then she locked the box again. But just as she turned back toward her bedroom, her phone buzzed with a new alert. A link, a post titled, Undisclosed Proof Surfaces, was Lorraine Carson using pre-saved AI. Her breath hitched. The link led to an edited clip of her viral video, slowed, distorted, with artificial voiceovers and altered timestamps. Someone had doctored the footage to make it seem like she was reading from an unseen device, not solving on her own. Below the post, thousands of shares, and a new hashtag trending by the hour. Fraud Janitor. As the online campaign intensifies, Lorraine's email pings with a final chilling message. No text, just a file attachment titled, The Real Lorraine Carson. Declassified. She stares at the screen and hesitates to open it. The email sat on Lorraine's screen like a live wire. The Real Lorraine Carson. Declassified. She hovered her cursor over the attachment, heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. She didn't open it. Not yet. Something about it felt like a trap, and she'd walked into too many of those already. Instead, she clicked out of the message and turned toward her notebook, the one she'd been rewriting since the video went viral. Page after page of calculations reworked, refined, poured from her memory. Not just the equations she'd corrected that night, but the theoretical paths surrounding them. 3 alternate solutions now lived in her book, each one clean, coherent, and structured without ever having touched a university classroom. It wasn't about showing off. It was about surviving. Because they were coming for her story, her character, her truth, and all she had was what she'd carried in her mind for decades. Inside Elmbrook's math department, the mood had shifted from contempt to panic. Dr. Kelman slammed the whiteboard marker down in frustration. His fingers were ink-stained, his eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. Equations filled the room like angry ghosts, and none of them solved the problem. We're missing something, he muttered. You mean, Dr. Reddick said from the corner. We're missing her. The room tensed. Kelman snapped. No. We're missing a variable. One overlooked coefficient, one shifted parameter. Dr. Vale cleared her throat. We've tried every parameter, every simulation. What she did, it wasn't just correction. It was intuition. She guessed. Kelman barked. People guess right sometimes. She didn't guess. Vale replied, voice sharpening. She restructured the foundation. The other professors fell quiet. Kelman glared at the board. The silence stretched too long. He finally muttered, "This isn't how this was supposed to go." No one replied, but they all knew what he meant. The department had built reputations, careers, grant proposals, millions of dollars, on that problem. And Lorraine Carson, a janitor with no formal training, had walked in and cracked its spine like it was nothing more than a riddle in a newspaper. What did that make them? The media was already asking the same question. Major outlets had started naming her alongside giants. Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, even Emmy Noether. A Time profile floated through editorial. A cover story titled, The Forgotten Mind of Elmbrook. Lorraine hadn't agreed to any interviews yet, but her silence only fueled the legend. In absence of her voice, the world filled the gaps with admiration and curiosity. But it wasn't just the media paying attention. Elmbrook's alumni network had started calling the development office. Donors wanted answers. One particularly influential board member, whose niece had dropped out of the math program the year before, sent a private email to the university president. If this woman is legit, why wasn't she hired 10 years ago? And if she's not, why is our entire faculty failing where she succeeded? The pressure was building from every direction. And inside the administration building, pressure created panic. In a conference room 3 floors above the math wing, Dr. Kelman and 2 administrators met behind locked doors. Confidential memos scattered the table. Everything from legal threats to FOIA requests from journalists demanding access to internal academic records. We're hemorrhaging credibility, one administrator said, wiping sweat from his brow. And she's not even speaking, the other added. Imagine what happens if she does. Kelman sat stone-faced, arms folded. We need a strategy, he said flatly. Something airtight. One administrator leaned in. Discredit the source. Kelman's eyes didn't blink. You mean the AI hypothesis? He asked. No, the man replied. Wider. We suggest she may have accessed departmental materials. That her solution matches archived doctoral proposals. Suggest she used custodial access to steal ideas over the years. Kelman narrowed his eyes. That's a dangerous accusation. Not if it's framed as a concern, the man said. Something vague. We're investigating potential overlaps in intellectual content. You plant the idea, let the public run with it. And if it backfires? Kelman asked. Then she becomes the problem, not us. Meanwhile, Lorraine sat at her kitchen table with her notebook open, and a legal pad beside it, covered in scribbles. She was working in silence, the kind only known to people who have learned to do their thinking in the dark. The numbers kept flowing, but her spirit felt tired. She had lived a life of silence. Now the world was demanding her voice. But every time she thought about stepping forward, she remembered the break-in. The card, the doctored footage, Mallory's disappearance. The risk wasn't just professional. It was personal. It was survival. A knock came at her door. She froze. Then, slowly, she opened it. Amber stood there, looking pale, clutching a tablet. You need to see this, she said. Inside, they sat at the table while Amber loaded the files. They didn't just edit your video, she whispered. They're moving against your pension. Lorraine blinked. My pension? Amber nodded. An internal whistleblower just leaked emails to my friend. Faculty communications. They're planning to declare your notebook entries as university intellectual property, retroactively. If they succeed, they could revoke your pension, your severance, maybe even sue you for theft. Lorraine stared at her. They're rewriting reality, she said slowly. Amber's hands trembled. They're scared of you, Lorraine. They're scared you're better than them. She handed the tablet to Lorraine. Email after email opened like venom. She accessed this material without authorization. We must explore our options for reassigning credit. Her notebooks contain replicated departmental structures. It may be possible to label this as IP theft and void employment claims. Lorraine felt something shift inside her. Not fear. Resolve. They're not scared I broke in, she whispered. They're scared I belonged. Amber nodded. And now they're trying to erase your financial safety net before the truth becomes too public. Lorraine closed the tablet and stood up slowly. Then it's time they heard from me. She sent her first public statement that night. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was mathematical. A video. 4 minutes and 19 seconds. In it, she sat at her kitchen table and solved a variation of the original problem from memory. Calm. Composed. No scripts. No prompts. Every line of logic laid out in real time. The video went viral in hours. Professors across the country watched it in stunned silence. Some tried to replicate it. Most failed. Others tried to dismiss it until she posted a second video explaining the same solution with alternate notation, showing she understood not just the path but the theory beneath the path. And in the comment section of each post, a single phrase repeated from users around the world. They tried to bury her, but she was already growing roots. The tides shifted again. But the faculty didn't retreat. They doubled down. Because the more brilliant she appeared, the more exposed they became. Then came the twist no one expected. A former doctoral candidate, once supervised by Kelman, anonymously leaked documents to a watchdog site. In them were outlines of departmental plans to create a unified solution framework. The problem? One section of the plan matched Lorraine's notebook, word for word. And the date on her notebook entry predated the department's draft by 3 years. The headline that followed exploded across academic Twitter. Was Elmbrook sitting on stolen math? The comments spiraled. Donors pulled funding. Petitions soared. But the most damning blow was still to come. That morning, Lorraine received a secure email from an anonymous address. Subject line: "You deserve to know what they said." Inside, 177 pages of internal faculty emails. Conversations spanning weeks. Lines that punched the soul. "We can't let her win. If she wins, we all look like fools. Erase her from the timeline. Make her the anomaly, not the norm. The moment we call her brilliant, we admit we missed it. And worse, we admit we let race blind us. She was never supposed to solve it. She was supposed to clean the floors." Lorraine stared at the screen, tears welling but never falling. They hadn't just underestimated her. They had built a system to ensure she never existed. And now that she did, they were unraveling. As Lorraine scrolled through the final page of the leaked emails, her phone rang. It was Daniel. Voice urgent. "They've just filed a motion. They're suing you for intellectual theft, and they're demanding you return every notebook you've ever written." Lorraine stood frozen in her kitchen as Daniel's voice crackled through the phone. "They're suing you, Lorraine. Intellectual theft. They're claiming your notebooks contain proprietary structures derived from departmental work." For a moment, she didn't breathe. It felt like the world condensed into a single ringing note, sharp and merciless. "They want my notebooks," she whispered. "All of them," Daniel said. "They filed an emergency motion. They're trying to force a judge to order you to surrender everything you've ever written." Lorraine pressed a hand to her forehead. "Those notebooks are my life. They're the only thing I've ever had." "I know," he said, "but they're counting on you being alone." But she wasn't. Not anymore. By morning, the lawsuit hit national headlines. Elmbrook University sues viral janitor for intellectual property theft. Whistleblower claims racial bias behind academic crackdown. The battle for brilliance. Who owns a mind? CNN replayed her chalk corrections in slow motion. NPR brought on mathematicians who called her a rare intuitive thinker. BBC ran a timeline of her life, pieced together from interviews, social media clips, and fragments from community members who knew her from decades past. In every broadcast, the contrast was merciless. A janitor, then being sued for it. The world didn't need subtitles to understand the subtext. That afternoon, Lorraine walked into a makeshift studio in a journalist's living room. She had never given a real interview before. Never needed to. Never dared to imagine anyone wanting her story. But now, millions of people wanted to hear her voice. Lights shone hot against her skin. A mic clipped to her shirt felt like a weight pressing directly against her heartbeat. Sienna, the reporter, sat across from her. Careful, warm, but terrified of pushing too hard. "You're brave for coming," Sienna whispered before the camera turned on. Lorraine shook her head. "I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being quiet." When the recording started, Lorraine sat straighter. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced them to rest on her lap. "Miss Carson," Sienna began gently, "for 30 years you've kept your mathematical work private. Why?" Lorraine swallowed. The air tasted like dust and fear. "No one ever asked. And I learned a long time ago that some people only see you for what they think you are. They never look deeper." "You're referring to the university?" Sienna asked. "I'm referring to my life," Lorraine said. "Teachers, counselors, employers, institutions." She let out a slow, trembling breath. "When you're black, brilliant, and poor," she said, "the world doesn't think you're real." The room went quiet. Sienna leaned forward. "Are you saying the university dismissed your work because of your race?" Lorraine paused, not out of hesitation, but because this was the moment the world would finally hear the words she'd swallowed for decades. "Yes," she said simply. "That's exactly what I'm saying." She continued, voice soft but unwavering. "If I had walked into that lab wearing a faculty badge, they would have framed my work under glass. If I had walked in wearing a student sweatshirt, they would have praised my potential. But I walked in with a mop." Her throat tightened, and they saw what they always wanted to see. By the time the interview aired, The country erupted. Thousands of comments flooded social media, millions of views. Protesters gathered at Elmbrook's gates, with signs reading, "Let her speak. Genius is not a crime. Stop academic racism." A group of black female mathematicians released a public statement defending her ability. One wrote, "What Lorraine did was not accidental. It was mastery." Students at Elmbrook held a silent walkout, flooding the courtyard with chalk writing across pavement, equations, diagrams, her name etched into concrete. When Lorraine saw the images online, her eyes filled. She had never asked to be a symbol. She had never imagined she could be one. And yet here she was, unexpectedly, unwillingly, sparking something larger than any equation she had ever solved. She wasn't just a story. She was becoming a movement. But the university struck back swiftly. President Gerard Maddox addressed the press that evening, his expression tight, controlled. "Miss Carson," he said, "has unfortunately become a symbol of misunderstanding. The public has been misled about the nature of her involvement in restricted research spaces. We encourage patience as the investigation continues. Academic integrity must come before public narratives." Lorraine watched the speech on her cracked television, a symbol of misunderstanding, as if her very existence had been misinterpreted, as if she were some blurry rumor, not a person. She whispered to herself. "They still don't see me." Amber, sitting beside her, clenched her fists. "This is their playbook. Make you seem unhinged, mistaken, confused. They can't fight your math, so they attack your clarity." Daniel called minutes later. "They're painting you as an amateur who wandered somewhere she didn't belong." "Story of my life," Lorraine murmured. "We'll respond," he promised. "We're not letting them rewrite this." But the university wasn't relying on speeches or spin. They were preparing something far more severe. Later that night, Sienna sent Lorraine a text. "They're trying to get ahead of you. Stay alert." Lorraine typed back. Ahead of what? But before Sienna could answer, another message came from her lawyer this time. "Check your email. Now." Lorraine opened her inbox. A single document sat at the top. Her breath faltered when she read the subject line, "Cease and desist notice. Unapproved academic claims." Her heart dropped. Hands shaking, she clicked it open. The letter was written in polished legal prose, cold and surgical. She read each paragraph slowly, disbelief turning to horror. "You are hereby ordered to cease all public commentary regarding mathematical work conducted at Elmbrook University. You are prohibited from discussing, reproducing, or implying authorship of academic material. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action. Your public statements are considered defamatory. You are not authorized to claim intellectual contribution to any mathematical research associated with Elmbrook's faculty or programs." By the time she reached the final line, her hands had gone numb. "Your viral content constitutes misrepresentation. You are directed to retract all ongoing claims." Lorraine stared at the glowing screen until her reflection blurred in her tears. Amber's voice shakily broke the silence. "Lorraine, they're trying to silence you completely." The room felt suddenly too small, too tight, walls closing around her like an invisible cage. Her thoughts spiraled. If she couldn't speak, if she couldn't defend herself, if she couldn't claim her own ideas, then the world would fill in the silence with someone else's version. The one Elmbrook wanted. The one that erased her. Her throat burned as she whispered, "They don't just want my notebooks. They want my voice." Amber reached for her hand. "They want your story." Lorraine's eyes lifted, filled with an anguish she hadn't let herself feel until now. "No," she said, voice cracking. "They want my existence to look accidental." That night, protests grew larger. Students projected her equations onto the sides of academic buildings. Twitter overflowed with solidarity posts. News anchors began calling Elmbrook ground zero for academic racism. But the university dug its heels deeper. Behind closed doors, Maddox convened an emergency board meeting. "We have to contain this," he ordered. "She is not an academic. Her claims are not valid." Kelman added, "If she continues speaking, she becomes untouchable." An administrator replied, "We'll stop her. Cease and desist is only step one." Maddox's jaw tightened. "Good. Then make sure step 2 leaves no room for her to rebuild." Across town, in her dim apartment, Lorraine sat alone, after Amber left, staring at the cease and desist letter as if it were a verdict already written. She whispered to herself, "They've taken everything I ever worked for, and now they're coming for the parts of me they never gave." Her phone buzzed. A new email. from an anonymous address. No greeting. Just 3 words. Stop talking now. Her hand trembled as she scrolled. Attached was a screenshot. A document. A court submission draft. It listed her name, followed by a recommended penalty. Permanent injunction against future academic claims. This wasn't about silencing her moment. It was about silencing her forever. As she stared at the screen, another document loaded, one she hadn't opened yet. Its title burned across her phone. Proposed motion. Declaration of fraud. Lorraine Carson. The title stared back at Lorraine from her cracked phone screen like a sentence already delivered. Proposed motion. Declaration of fraud. Lorraine Carson. For a long moment she couldn't move. She sat at the edge of her narrow bed, the dim glow of the street lamp spilling through the blinds and cutting faint stripes across her hands. Her breath came shallow, uneven. A cease and desist had shaken her, but this felt like the final blow. A declaration of fraud wasn't just a legal attack. It was an erasure, a bureaucratic burial, a way of carving her name into the record, not as a thinker, not as a worker, not as a woman, but as a liar. Her phone buzzed again. A second email appeared. This time, the subject line held only 2 words. We're coming. Lorraine dropped the phone as if it had burned her skin. For the first time since the equation, since the video, since the protests and interviews and threats, she felt the full weight of the machine, crushing in. She had survived bias, insults, academic ostracization, institutional racism, but this was different. This was the system turning its sharpened paperwork directly toward her. Her knees buckled, and she steadied herself against the dresser. A soft knock sounded at her door. She froze. Lorraine? It was a woman's voice. It's us. Open up. She recognized it. Sienna. She hurried to the door and pulled it open. Sienna stood there, shoulders wrapped in a thin coat, her hair still damp from rain. Beside her stood a man Lorraine had never seen before. Tall, black, mid-40s, a firm but kind expression, a leather satchel slung across his shoulder. He extended his hand. Marcus Holloway, he said. Civil rights attorney. Lorraine blinked in disbelief. Civil rights? Marcus nodded once. You're going to need one. Sienna stepped forward. The motion filing leaked. Marcus saw it online before it was taken down. He called me immediately. Marcus looked at Lorraine with a seriousness that said he didn't have time for pleasantries. Miss Carson, Elmbrook isn't just trying to silence you. They're trying to brand you permanently. If this motion passes, your name could be legally associated with fraud for the rest of your life. Lorraine swallowed hard. I can't afford a lawyer. Marcus smiled faintly. Good thing you don't have to. I'm taking your case pro bono. She stared at him, stunned. Why? You don't even know me. Marcus's eyes softened. I don't need to know you to recognize what's happening. Institutions have been using policy to suffocate brilliance in black bodies for centuries. You're not the first to face this. But you're the first in a long time whose story is public enough to fight back. Lorraine's hands covered her face. For a moment she thought she might collapse from sheer emotional overload. Marcus continued gently. Lorraine, you aren't fighting alone anymore. The law is on your side now. By morning Marcus had filed a counteraction on her behalf. Carson v. Elmbrook University. Racial discrimination. Retaliation and intellectual suppression. The filing rippled across the media like lightning. CNN hosted legal analyst. Discussing whether Elmbrook had overstepped, NPR interviewed former students who shared eerily similar stories of racial bias at the university. BBC released a piece comparing the case to historical instances where institutions weaponized procedure to crush marginalized talent. On TikTok, clips of Lorraine solving equations played under captions like, "When genius threatens the wrong people." The court of public opinion was overwhelmingly on her side. But the court of law was a different world entirely. Lorraine stepped into the federal courthouse flanked by Marcus, Sienna and Daniel. Cameras flashed outside. Protesters cheered her name. Reporters yelled questions she didn't dare answer. Inside, the building felt colder than winter. Marble floors echoing with footsteps. Tall ceilings swallowing voices. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You face them now, he whispered. Not on their campus. Not in their boardrooms. Here. Lorraine nodded once, though her knees trembled. Inside the courtroom, Elmbrook's legal team sat across the aisle. 5 attorneys in sleek charcoal suits, polished shoes, tight expressions. At the center sat the university's lead counsel, a woman with a severe jaw and colder eyes. She watched Lorraine not with curiosity or respect, but calculation. When the judge entered, everyone rose. Judge Carmen Albright, a stern woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair, took her seat. Lorraine had read about her before. She was known for being blunt, fair, and unimpressed by theatrics. A judge who cared more about truth than performance. Marcus leaned in. "She's good. Stay calm." The proceedings began. Elmbrook's counsel stood first. "Your Honor," she said, "this case is not about discrimination. It is about an employee who exploited her custodial access to tamper with academic materials, potentially compromising federally funded research." Lorraine felt her throat tighten. Ms. Carson entered a restricted research space without authorization. The counsel continued. "She altered the contents of an ongoing academic experiment. She is now attempting to claim intellectual ownership of materials derived from university property." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have evidence she intended to commit theft?" The counsel hesitated, adjusting her papers. "Intent is irrelevant. The act alone constitutes misconduct." Marcus rose calmly. "With respect, Your Honor, intent is highly relevant, especially when the university is accusing a woman of fraud for the audacity of being intelligent." The gallery murmured. Judge Albright lifted a hand, silencing the room. Marcus approached the bench. "This case," he said, "is about a black woman whose brilliance was dismissed, punished, and now weaponized against her." Elmbrook did not investigate misconduct. They retaliated the moment her work threatened their hierarchy. He lifted the stack of Lorraine's original notebooks. Weathered, handwritten, dated. "These notebooks," he said, "are time-stamped across 30 years. Thousands of pages. Equations that match nothing in Elmbrook's archives. Equations she wrote long before she ever cleaned one of their floors." He set the notebooks on the evidence table, with a weight that echoed through the entire room. "And yet," Marcus continued, "the university claims she stole ideas that didn't exist until she wrote them." The judge's gaze sharpened. Elmbrook's counsel stood abruptly. "Your Honor, handwritten dates can be forged. These are not validated." Marcus smiled faintly, expecting the challenge. "That's why," he said, "we had them authenticated this morning by the National Archives Forensic Handwriting Division." Gasps rippled across the courtroom. Marcus lifted a sealed folder. "These notebooks are verified. Ink aging, paper degradation, pressure indentations, chemical analysis. Every test confirms authenticity." Elmbrook's counsel stiffened. Judge Albright leaned forward. "Is this true?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. Lorraine's work predates Elmbrook's research by years. They cannot accuse her of stealing what she created first." Lorraine swallowed hard, emotion tightening her chest. For the first time in her life, someone stood up and said her work mattered. Her handwriting mattered. Her decades of quiet brilliance mattered. Elmbrook's counsel pressed on. "Your Honor, even if the notebooks are authentic, Miss Carson still violated security policies. She entered a restricted lab." Marcus cut in, voice calm but sharp. "Under orders from her supervisor." Elmbrook's counsel blinked. "What?" Marcus slid forward a printed email. A custodial work order form dated 3 months back. "Here is the directive assigning her to that wing," he said. "No mention of any restricted areas, no warnings, no access limitations. And as a janitor, she was contractually obligated to clean every room listed." The judge eyed the document. Elmbrook's counsel. "How do you respond?" The woman faltered. "Those forms are automated. The restrictions were verbal." "Verbal instructions," Marcus said evenly, "which you cannot prove were ever delivered." The courtroom murmured again. Judge Albright tapped her gavel once. Silence. Elmbrook's counsel regained composure. "Even so, her actions jeopardized grant-funded research. She introduced unauthorized changes to a mathematical model she had no qualification to evaluate." Lorraine closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. She spoke for the first time. "I didn't jeopardize anything," she said softly. "I saw a mistake." The room fell silent. Marcus placed a steadying hand on her arm, but did not stop her. Lorraine continued, voice trembling but firm. "My whole life people told me I didn't belong in rooms with equations, that I wasn't supposed to ask questions, that brilliance didn't look like me." She glanced at the judges, the lawyers, the crowded spectators. "But I didn't break anything in that lab. I fixed something, and they couldn't accept that someone like me, someone they never saw, could see something they missed." Her words hung suspended in the courtroom air like a truth too heavy to ignore. Judge Albright regarded her with an unreadable expression, then turned back to Elmbrook's counsel. Counsel, she said, I want all faculty communications related to this case. The attorney stiffened. Your Honor, all emails, internal memos, group threads, meeting minutes, everything regarding Miss Carson's name or this equation. Judge Albright, this is excessive. The judge's voice sharpened. Counsel, when a university claims intellectual theft while simultaneously erasing an employee's contributions, transparency is not excessive. It is mandatory. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. You have 72 hours. Elmbrook's counsel went pale. Marcus exhaled slowly. Lorraine felt the shift in the room. Subtle. Electric. This wasn't just a legal turning point. This was the moment the institution realized its walls were no longer thick enough to hide behind. As the judge adjourned, Marcus's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, and his expression darkened. He whispered to Lorraine, You're not going to like this. Someone just deleted 20 years of faculty emails from Elmbrook's servers. Marcus stood outside the courthouse steps, phone still pressed to his ear, disbelief hardening his features. Lorraine had just exited behind him, flanked by Sienna and Daniel. The energy from the courtroom victory was still fresh, still fragile, and then came the blow. Say it again, he murmured into the phone. The voice on the other end replied in clipped, urgent tone. 20 years of internal faculty emails, deleted. All mail servers tied to department chairs, committee members, and the dean's office. Gone overnight. Lorraine's heart dropped. Sienna looked over, sensing the shift in Marcus's face. What is it? Marcus turned to Lorraine slowly, his voice quiet but heavy. They purged the digital archive. Everything the judge requested gone. Lorraine felt her knees weaken. They destroyed the evidence? Or hid it somewhere no one can reach? Daniel muttered, That's not just obstruction. That's a coordinated cover-up. Marcus's eyes narrowed. They're panicking, and that tells us something important. Whatever was in those emails, it wasn't just about damage control. It was intent. Within 48 hours, a cybersecurity firm, hired by Marcus's legal team, confirmed the worst. The email servers tied to Elmbrook's Department of Mathematics had experienced a sudden catastrophic purge. Backups were overwritten. Internal audit logs had been tampered with. A whistleblower, an IT analyst working late on maintenance, slipped a flash drive into a sealed envelope and delivered it to Sienna anonymously. The files were raw system logs, encrypted fragments. But the metadata pointed to something explosive. Mass deletions had been triggered not by a virus or error, but by a manual override. Someone inside the university had done it, deliberately and fast, within hours of Judge Albright's court order. When the logs were decrypted, a recovered batch of internal memos hit the press like a thunderclap. One subject line read, Urgent, damage to department integrity. Another read, Containment strategy, non-academic exposure. But the most damning came from Dr. Kellman himself. An email dated months before Lorraine's discovery ever went viral. He wrote, If the janitor's work proves valid, we lose everything. This cannot go public. It will delegitimize the department. We'll be seen as obsolete. Another professor had replied, She has no credentials. Frame it as a breach. Bury it in policy violations. Another one wrote, We can't have a janitor solve what our PhDs couldn't. It will destroy us. The story exploded. Hashtags surged back into trending. Ivory Tower racism. Genius buried. They feared her mind. Students at Elmbrook spray-painted math equations across the faculty lounge windows. National news outlets ran op-eds with titles like, Not good enough to learn, but good enough to be feared. Lorraine sat on her couch staring at the printouts. She whispered, They didn't just try to stop me, they planned it. Amber sat across from her, shaking her head. They saw you before you saw yourself, and they made you think you were invisible. Lorraine ran a hand over her forehead, exhausted. 30 years of quiet, and the whole time, they were trying to keep me quiet, even before I spoke. Amber's phone buzzed. She glanced down, then looked up with wide eyes. They're saying you weren't the first. Lorraine turned to her sharply. What? Amber handed her the screen. A tweet from a former Elmbrook student had gone viral. My brother dropped out of Elmbrook's math program in 1998. He said a black custodian corrected his thesis and was never credited. He said it broke her. I think it was Lorraine, but maybe it wasn't. Another tweet followed. There were others. My mom was passed over for a teaching fellowship in the 90s. She found out later her application was flagged culturally unaligned. Same department. Elmbrook's been doing this for years. Dozens of similar messages appeared. Students, former applicants, staffers, custodians. Lorraine leaned back slowly, heart hammering. I wasn't their first victim. Amber looked at her. Just the first one they couldn't erase. Within 72 hours, pressure mounted for testimony. A former Elmbrook dean, Dr. Maxwell Harrow, came forward. Retired, long out of academia, his hair white and posture frail, but his voice steady. He contacted Marcus's team directly. I kept files, he said over the phone. Memos, letters, complaints that were buried. I didn't have the power to stop it. But I didn't destroy them, either. Will you testify? Marcus asked. Harrow was quiet for a long moment. Then, yeah, the news broke before noon. Retired dean to testify in Carson case. Claims evidence of systemic academic discrimination. Lorraine sat still when she saw the headline. Her voice cracked when she whispered, "They're going to come after him." Marcus nodded grimly. "We're already setting up protection." Sienna added, "We'll digitize everything. If something happens to him, his testimony will still be heard." Lorraine exhaled shakily. They can't keep hiding behind their credentials anymore. But the system wasn't finished fighting back. 2 days before the trial resumed, Lorraine received a call from Daniel, his voice hollow. "Lorraine, it's Harrow." Her breath caught. "What happened?" He collapsed. Chest pains. They rushed him to St. Luke's. Lorraine stood up, the room spinning slightly. He's alive but unconscious. They're saying stress. He was preparing files when it happened." Marcus entered the room moments later, already informed. "We're requesting an emergency deposition while he's still under medical care," he said. "If he recovers, he'll speak in court. But if not, we'll need his voice preserved now." Lorraine sat down slowly, grief and fury mixing inside her. She'd seen this before, not this man, not this case, but the pattern. Black brilliance rises, the system scrambles. Truth threatens, pressure mounts, and the body pays. Sienna touched her shoulder gently. "He wanted to help you, Lorraine." Lorraine nodded silently. Then she whispered, "I can't let him be the last voice to try." She stood, steadied herself, and looked at Marcus. "Let's make sure this doesn't die in a hospital bed." But late that night, as rain slicked the sidewalks and the courthouse sat locked in silence, an anonymous leak hit the press again. A video, from a confidential staff meeting at Elmbrook. A professor could be heard whispering, "We should have shredded it all. The memos, the letters, everything with her name on it. Doesn't matter. She's a symbol now. Not even court can unmake that. So we bury her in process, drain her, outlast her. That's how this ends." Lorraine watched the clip play back on loop. They weren't just trying to win. They were trying to survive her. The next morning, Marcus arrived with a grim expression and a manila folder in his hand. He dropped it on Lorraine's table and said, "We just got Harrow's files." And Lorraine, your name wasn't only in the math department's archive. Lorraine blinked. "What do you mean?" Marcus opened the folder slowly. "They tracked you in admissions, facilities. Even in the Board of Trustees communications, years before you touched that whiteboard." Marcus laid the manila folder on the table like a surgeon preparing to deliver news no one wanted to hear. Lorraine stared at it, the weight of everything leading up to this moment resting inside that thin cardboard shell. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he watched her, studying her face for readiness or perhaps permission. Lorraine nodded slowly. "Show me," she whispered. Marcus flipped the folder open. Inside were photocopies of letters, memos, shredded fragments pieced together with tape, handwritten notes, and admissions committee annotations. Some pages were yellowed with age, others bore water stains or burnt corners, likely from attempts to destroy them. He slid one page toward her. Admissions Committee Review, 1992. She swallowed hard. She had seen the front of this file before, decades ago when she was still young enough to believe her life was something she could talk her way into. But she had never seen the backside. The scribbled margins, confidential annotations. One note read, "High aptitude, but not socially aligned with departmental culture. Monitor if admitted." Another, "Potential outlier, would require significant integration resources." And then, "Reject. Risk factor too high." Lorraine's throat tightened. Risk factor. What risk? Marcus shook his head. Your intelligence. They feared bringing in someone they couldn't control. She leaned back. breath trembling. All that time I thought I just wasn't good enough. The words seeped out like a wound she had carried for too many years. Marcus leaned closer. They tracked you, Lorraine. Admissions. HR. Even trustees. Someone flagged you as a pattern disruptor. You weren't rejected because you lacked ability. You were rejected because you had too much. Lorraine pressed a hand to her chest, her voice barely audible. So they didn't break me by accident. No, Marcus said softly. They broke you by design. Before she could speak, her phone buzzed. A banking alert. She frowned, unlocking it. Then her stomach dropped. Your account has been suspended. Contact support. She blinked. Reread it. Blinked again. What? She whispered. Marcus stiffened immediately. What happened? My bank account, Lorraine breathed. It's froze. Sienna, already gathering documents at the far end of the table, froze mid-movement. Frozen how? Lorraine handed her the phone. Sienna's eyes scanned rapidly. This looks like a fraud hold, but without notifying you? That's unusual. Daniel grabbed his laptop. Let me check something. His fingers flew over the keys. Scrolls. Taps. A deep exhale. They reported you for suspicious activity, he said. Anonymous complaint. Lorraine shook her head. Suspicious? I barely use that account. Marcus clenched his jaw. They're coming at you from every angle. Money is the first squeeze. As if on cue, a tow truck groaned outside the window. Daniel darted to the balcony. Lorraine, your car. She rushed to the door, flung it open, and ran to the railing. Below, two men in uniform were hooking her rusted blue sedan to the truck. Hey, Lorraine shouted. That's my car. You can't. One man looked up, unbothered. Repossession order. Repossession? She cried. I'm not behind on anything. The second man shrugged. Paperwork says otherwise. Marcus hurried to the railing beside her. They're retaliating. They're tightening the net. Lorraine's voice cracked with disbelief. My money. My car. What's next? What came next arrived that evening. Anonymous messages. Printed notes slipped under her door. Emails from untraceable accounts. Threats whispered like warnings from a world determined to put her back in the shadows. One read, Geniuses don't mop floors. You're lying. Another, Stop pretending you belong. You're embarrassing yourself. A third, Drop the case, or we'll drop you. Marcus insisted she stay with him, or at a secure location. She refused. Something inside her stubborn, angry, exhausted, wanted to face the fire in her own home. But the worst strike came later that night, when Amber burst into the apartment pale and breathless. Lorraine, they leaked your medical records. Lorraine froze. What? Amber held up her phone, trembling. Someone posted your psychiatric file, from 20 years ago, the episode after your mother passed. Lorraine's heart sank to the floor. Her depression, her grief, her private pain. Exposed. Weaponized. Marcus grabbed the phone from Amber and his face twisted with fury. This is illegal. This is monstrous. Where did you find this? Amber swallowed. A PR firm posted an anonymous tip to multiple outlets. They're saying Lorraine is emotionally unstable, that the stress from her job caused cognitive disorientation, that her math is delusional. Lorraine's knees nearly buckled. She sat down slowly on the edge of the couch, hands shaking. They're going after my mental health, she whispered. They're painting me as broken. Marcus crouched in front of her. You weren't broken. You were grieving. They don't care, she murmured, eyes hollow. They'll use anything. Even the parts of me I hid. Daniel looked sick. This is a full smear campaign. Psychological, financial, institutional. Amber whispered, they want to make the world think you imagined everything. Lorraine pressed her palms to her eyes. I'm so tired. I'm so tired. What do you want us to do? Marcus asked gently. She didn't answer. Her silence said everything. The next morning, major news outlets released a coordinated barrage. Carson's mathematical claims questioned after mental health history surfaces. Is the viral janitor stable enough to evaluate complex equations? Experts say psychological episodes can lead to false confidence. The phrase mentally unstable was repeated on air like a curse. Lorraine watched the news from her couch, wrapped in a thin blanket that suddenly felt like armor too fragile to protect anything. She stared at the headlines, unable to look away. I shouldn't have told anyone, she whispered. Not about my past. Not about my mother. Marcus stood behind her, tense. You didn't tell anyone. They stole this. She shook her head slowly. The world believes what it wants to believe. And right now, it wants to believe I'm impossible. No, Marcus said. They want to believe they're safe. And your brilliance makes them unsafe. 3 days into the smear campaign, the situation worsened. Her mailbox filled with letters, some supportive, others dripping with venom. A news van parked across the street. A stranger lingered on her hallway landing at night. The car that had idled outside before now returned, parking at odd hours with the engine off but presence unmistakable. Lorraine's sleep grew fractured. She would jolt awake at small sounds. She barely ate. She barely left the apartment. Marcus visited daily, but even he saw her slipping deeper into herself. Talk to me, he pleaded one afternoon. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at a page of half-finished equations. I don't recognize myself anymore, she murmured. I used to think in numbers. Now I think in fear. You're under attack, he said. This isn't weakness. It's trauma. She didn't look at him. I feel like I'm drowning in other people's narratives. Then she whispered something so soft he almost missed it. What if they're right? What if I'm the one who's delusional? Marcus gripped the table, desperate to find the words. Lorraine, look at me. She didn't. Look at me. Finally, her eyes lifted, filled with exhaustion and doubt. You solved something a department couldn't touch in 7 years, he said. That's not delusion. That's clarity. A tear traced down her cheek. But clarity doesn't protect me, she whispered. Their power does. He inhaled sharply. Then we'll take their power. But Lorraine didn't respond, and something in her gaze told him she no longer believed she could win. That night, a storm rolled in, heavy rain pounding against the windows, thunder cracking in the distance. Amber called Lorraine twice. No answer. Marcus texted. Daniel called. Sienna emailed. Nothing. By morning a dread settled over them like fog. Marcus drove straight to her apartment. He knocked. No answer. He tried the knob. Locked. He called her name. Silence. The neighbors said they hadn't seen her since yesterday afternoon. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Marcus's chest tightened. No. 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 Lorraine, don't do this. He dialed her again, then again, then again. Nothing. Amber arrived breathless, face pale. She's not online. No posts. No messages. Daniel pulled up his tracking app. Her phone is off. Not dead. Off. What does that mean? Amber asked. Marcus didn't look up. It means she didn't lose her phone. His voice cracked. She turned it off. He stepped back, pressing a hand to his forehead. We need to find her. Now. Amber whispered, barely audible. Where would she go? Daniel swallowed hard. Where do people go, he said, when the world tries to erase them? No one answered, because they all knew the truth. Lorraine could be anywhere, or nowhere. By the end of the 3rd day, a breaking news alert flashed across every major network. Civil rights figure Lorraine Carson missing. Last seen 72 hours ago. Day 4. The world was still searching. News tickers looped Lorraine's name like a hymn. Civil rights icon still missing. Where is Lorraine Carson? Find Lorraine trends across 40 states. Photos circulated. Interviews replayed. Volunteers searched. Anonymous tips flooded hotlines. Candlelight vigils were held on Elmbrook's campus. Once hostile, now surrounded in silence and shame. Students stood holding signs with her equations printed across their chests like armor. One poster read, "You can erase data. You can't erase truth." And then, without warning, on the evening of the 5th day, she appeared. Not in hiding, not in crisis, but on a stage. The auditorium at Marlow University. Elmbrook's fiercest academic rival was standing room only. Reporters were barred. Cameras were permitted only on the university's terms. Security surrounded the venue, not out spectacle, but necessity. A single podium stood at center stage. Behind it, a massive projection screen displayed her name. Lorraine Carson, Honorary Doctor of Mathematical Philosophy. The lights dimmed, and then she walked out. The audience gasped. Gone was the janitor uniform. Gone were the shadows of courtroom lighting, hospital rooms, and whispered rumors. She wore a tailored black robe, lined in crimson silk, the ceremonial garment of a university professor. Her posture was different, not defiant, not performative, but whole, complete, as if after being shattered, she had carefully reassembled herself piece by piece, this time stronger. Marcus sat in the front row, eyes rimmed red. Amber clutched Daniel's hand. Sienna pressed her fingers over her mouth to keep from sobbing. Lorraine approached the podium, placed her notes down gently, and let silence hang in the air. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. I did not disappear. The room went still. I retreated, she said. Because when the system tries to erase you, the only way to survive is to remember that your existence was never meant to fit inside their frame. Murmurs spread through the room. My name is Lorraine Carson, she said, her voice louder now. I am not a mistake. I am not a security breach. I am not a delusion. She paused. I am the answer they weren't ready for. A low wave of breath swept the auditorium. Her lecture was titled, When Institutions Fear the Wrong Genius. She didn't tell her story for sympathy. She told it for clarity. She described how talent was filtered through bias, how gatekeeping thrived in the disguise of professionalism, how racism didn't always scream. It often whispered. It hid behind procedure, policy, and polite deferrals. She showed equations, formulas she had refined in silence. Diagrams, they said, she was incapable of grasping. She broke them down. She invited the crowd in. And then she stopped speaking and just wrote. On a digital whiteboard projected on the main screen, she traced an unsolved algorithm, the one she'd seen on the board the night her life changed. She rewrote it, not to show off, but to illuminate. With one adjustment, a shift in axis weight, she solved the third phase. The audience erupted in gasps. It was clean, elegant, undeniable, and it was hers. When the recording hit the internet, it detonated. Her lecture garnered 12 million views in 72 hours. The hashtag #JuneWrongGenius became a national slogan. Multiple Ivy League schools publicly offered her visiting lectureships. Harvard's Black Student Union issued a statement calling her the most important unsanctioned mind of the decade. The New York Times wrote, Lorraine Carson didn't just solve an equation. She solved how we hide brilliance in plain sight. But Lorraine wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because the civil trial wasn't over, justice had not been served. She could dress like a professor, speak like a scholar, dismantle systems with sentences. But none of it mattered until the courtroom acknowledged what the world already knew. That they had tried to break her. And when they couldn't, they tried to erase her. The next court date drew thousands. Inside, Marcus brought Harrow's recovered testimony, now admissible. They presented security logs, deleted memos, forensic ink analyses. Lorraine didn't sit silently this time. She sat at the front of the courtroom beside her legal team. Elmbrook, once smug and towering, now looked fractured. Their lawyers hunched, their statements more defensive than polished. And then came the jury selection. 12 seats filled with strangers, men and women from varied backgrounds, races, professions. The case was civil, not criminal, but the emotional weight felt identical. The trial neared its end. Arguments closed. All that remained was the verdict. 2 days before deliberation began, Marcus received a phone call at 11:03. Marcus Holloway? Yes. This is Clerk Denton from Judge Albright's office. We need to speak in person, now. Within the hour, Marcus arrived at the courthouse. The judge met him privately. Mr. Holloway, she said, her voice taut. We've discovered something troubling. She slid a sealed envelope across the table. Inside were screenshots. One of the jurors, Alan Reese, mid-50s, white male, insurance executive, had been emailing someone from an encrypted address. The subject line read, Carson case, verdict tomorrow. The email read, it's going her way. Pretty much unanimous. Settling in her favor. I'm just one vote, but wanted to give you a heads up. Marcus's blood ran cold. This is juror misconduct, the judge said. Potential tampering. Marcus stared at the message. What does this mean? Judge Albright exhaled. It means if this spreads, if the leak affects deliberations, we'll be forced to declare a mistrial. Marcus felt the air vanish from his lungs. No, he said. No, they can't erase this again. Judge Albright met his gaze squarely. Then we better act fast. Lorraine didn't sleep that night. She sat in her apartment, robe folded neatly across her lap, the honorary certificate untouched in its envelope beside her. The room was quiet, too quiet. When Marcus arrived and told her about the juror, she didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just said, they're still trying. Marcus nodded. But they're losing control. Lorraine looked out the window. It's not just about my verdict anymore, she said. It's about whether truth is strong enough to survive sabotage. He sat beside her. Is it? he asked. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, it has to be. At 7:41 a.m., just before the courtroom doors opened, a breaking headline shook the legal world. Elmbrook juror caught in verdict leak. Was in direct contact with university PR firm. Lorraine stared at the screen. The same firm that leaked her psychiatric records was now tied to the jury. Her voice cold and certain said one thing. They never stopped playing dirty. The courtroom doors opened and the jury filed in. Lorraine sat in the front row of the gallery. Robes earlier set aside, legal team at her side, and a hush sweeping the room like a tide. The air trembled with expectation and memory. The media thrummed beyond the walls, but inside, all of that diminished to one luminous heartbeat. Marcus stood and motioned to his team. They withdrew back to their seats. Lorraine straightened in her chair, hands lightly clasped, thumb brushing the small honor certificate envelope beside her. The years of hidden notebooks, of cleaning floors unseen, of being told she didn't belong, they all coalesced in that moment. Judge Albright cleared her throat. Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict? The juror foreperson looked up, nods, papers shuffled. Yes, Your Honor. We find for the plaintiff, Lorraine Carson. The words landed like a thunderclap. Gasps echoed. Lorraine closed her eyes, tears prickling. Her heart pounded. But something, perhaps relief, perhaps shock, kept her still. Judge Albright continued. The defendant, Elmbrook University, is ordered to pay damages in the amount of $12,400,000 and issue a formal apology to Ms. Carson and to establish a scholarship fund in her name. The official cadence of justice met the roar of the world. In the gallery, applause erupted. Marcus caught Lorraine's hand. You did it, he whispered. You really did it. She nodded slowly, but couldn't speak. The moment had arrived, and yet part of her felt outside of it, like an observer watching someone she once was. After the formalities, reporters surged forward. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust, questions fired. Ms. Carson, what does this victory mean to you? Lorraine inhaled. She raised the certificate. It means they can no longer ignore me, she said, voice steady. It means brilliance cannot be hidden behind policy or prejudice. She paused, scanning the crowd. But it also means this fight isn't over. Not for others like me. The story splashed across front pages the next morning. Janitor wins 12.4 mem verdict against Elmbrook. Justice served or just beginning. When a cleaning cart meets the ivory tower, universities across the country took notice. Students held rallies. Professors issued statements. Donors asked difficult questions. Panels were convened on institutional bias in higher education. Inside the Elmbrook campus, change rippled. The building that housed the mathematics department, once a monolith of silent exclusion, surfaced on news feeds. Alumni demanded transparency. Faculty resigned quietly. New hires were announced under diversity initiatives, with renewed language of equity. But Lorraine didn't see victory as clean. Her mind turned to everything left in shadow. In her apartment later, the certificate cradled in her arms. She thought of the notebooks under her bed. She thought of the broken night shifts, the dismissed applications, the moments when she told herself to be grateful to just have a job. They hadn't just succeeded in silencing her. They had tried for decades to keep her invisible. And now the glory arrived. But the scars remained. When Marcus stopped by later, he sat and studied her. You okay? He asked. She nodded faintly. Yes, and no. He nodded in understanding. This doesn't erase what happened. She set the certificate on the table. I know, it doesn't fix the years they built walls around me. But maybe it starts the next chapter. Marcus leaned forward. What do you want? Lorraine looked at him, eyes resolute. I want them to remember my name. And then I want them to change how they look at people like me. He smiled. That's a good goal. They sat together in silence. Both felt the truth. The verdict was a milestone, not an endpoint. The unexpected twist came the next morning. A package arrived at Lorraine's apartment. No return address. Inside, a simple black binder. On the cover, in silver letters, Elmbrook, higher review, 9. She opened it. Inside were scanned pages, faculty memos, board meeting minutes, review committee decisions, many redacted, some intact. They documented patterns of rejecting qualified applicants, labeling them socially incompatible, outlier risk, or economic burden. Her breath hitched. On page 37 she found her own name. But above it, the notation candidate flagged, potential disruptive influence, maintain oversight. She stared. Not just the admissions memo. They'd labeled her, not just as unqualified, but as a disruption. And here's the twist. Inside the binder was a typed letter from the university's founding endowment, dated 1965, listing custodial staff as support personnel and explicitly barring them from research and academic roles. In black and white, the document said, "Custodial personnel are hereby designated as non-academic staff. They shall not engage in research, publication, or intellectual contribution beyond maintenance duties." She felt her world. The system wasn't just biased. It was designed to exclude, designed to define who could think. She sat back, notebook in her lap, trembling. The binder felt heavier than the verdict. Because the verdict fixed what happened. The binder explained why it happened. She would need to share this. The scholarship fund. The public apology. It would mean something only if the underlying architecture changed. Later that day, Lorraine returned to Umbrook's campus for the first time since her janitorial badge was revoked. She walked past the security checkpoint. The guard paused, nodded, then let her pass without comment. She moved slowly down the hallway, the scent of cleaned tile and discarded coffee cups stirring old ghosts. She came to a door she knew well, the janitor's closet where she once stored her cleaning supplies. The metal door looked small now. The name tag still read custodial office in faded letters. Marcus followed behind, respectful. Lorraine placed a hand on the door. "This used to be my entire world," she said quietly. They stepped inside. The shelf where her mop bucket stood was empty. Her coat hanger gone. She surveyed the walls, scuffs from dozens of nights, scrubbing, chalk dust, still lingering in tiny nooks. Then she turned toward the far wall. A message had been carved, faint but visible in the dust and metal. She was never supposed to win. Her breath hitched. Marcus stepped closer. "What is that?" She swallowed. "I don't know when it was carved, but someone decided I shouldn't succeed, and left their shame behind." Silence filled the small room. She touched the letters with her fingers. The dust crumbled. "They feared me," she whispered. "They carved it when they thought I couldn't hear." Marcus stood silent. Lorraine looked up. "But I did win." She let that truth wash over her. And in that janitor's closet, now a relic of the past, she felt something shift. She closed the door softly behind her. In the auditorium that evening, the scholarship fund announcement took place. Students, professors, donors, media, crowds gathered as the university president read the statement. Elmbrook University acknowledges the systemic failures revealed in Ms. Carson's case. We apologize for the injustice done and commit to establishing the Lorraine Carson Scholars Program, supporting underrepresented students in advanced mathematics. Lorraine watched from the front row. Her parents sat behind her, her father in his worn jacket, her mother smiling despite years of hardship. Her aunt in the third row cried quietly. The applause hit her chest like a hammer. Her name had become the program. Her life the emblem. But she looked up at the windows of the mathematics building. Opposite, workers were placing new plaques, new signage. The department, once high and hiding, was being rebranded. And she wondered, would they really change? Or would they just alter the exterior? That night, alone in her apartment with the binder open, Lorraine typed an email to the foundation set up for the scholarship. Subject: Program Vision. Beyond my name. She wrote about access, mentorship, funding, curriculum, institutional reform. She ended with, "This fund must not be a memorial for me. It must be a mobilizer for others." She paused, fingers hovering over the send button. Outside her window, the city lights flickered. The storm she had lived through, the media, the smear, the lawsuit, the loss, the victory, had left scars. But she also sensed something growing. A world staring back. A system exposed. And the question now wasn't just if justice had been done. It was, can justice be sustained? The binder sat on her desk, sentinel of truth. The carved message in the janitor's closet sat in her mind. The verdict stood tall. Still, her name carried weight. Her dignity stood taller than any tower on campus. Yet something inside her held tight to the fact that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant remembering and rebuilding. She closed the binder, switched off the lamp, and turned toward the window. She saw the building where she once cleaned floors. Now she walked past it as a scholar, not a janitor. But the message carved on the wall reminded her, they never expected her to walk there at all. And she did. As she prepared for bed, her phone buzzed. A video attachment. No caption. She opened it and watched the live feed of her old classroom, the one she studied in as a young woman. Doors locked, lights off, and someone whispered, quietly but clearly, "You won. We lost. But we aren't finished." Lorraine didn't sleep after the video. She watched it over and over. Grainy night vision footage of a locked classroom, the windows dusted with neglect, and a single whispered line, echoing from the shadows. "You won. We lost. But we aren't finished." She didn't tell Marcus. Not yet. Not because she was afraid, but because she already knew how institutions like Elmbrook worked. They didn't disappear after verdicts. They metastasized, moved into corners, changed names, formed subcommittees, and came back quieter, sharper, more strategic. They weren't finished, but neither was she. Weeks passed, then months. The media firestorm dulled, but Lorraine's presence only grew. She turned down university job offers. She declined honorary degrees. She ignored talk shows waving six-figure contracts. Instead, she bought a second-hand van with her settlement money. Not a fancy SUV. Not a brand new Tesla. Just a plain white van. And she hit the road. No entourage. No security detail. No prep. She went school to school, town to town. Small classrooms, broken chalkboards, unpolished tiles, places that reminded her of where her love for numbers was first born and quietly buried. In Birmingham, she visited a school with no functioning heating system. She taught fifth graders how math could map light patterns in galaxies. In Tulsa, she rewrote a high school curriculum overnight, when she found the district's textbook didn't mention a single black mathematician. In Chicago, she walked into a detention center and drew formulas on the wall, with charcoal for teens awaiting sentencing. At each stop, she brought one thing, a single piece of chalk, and left behind something stronger than any institution had ever given her, a living legacy. Kids followed her now, not like fans but like shadows looking for direction. One girl, age 12, cried when Lorraine handed her a handwritten formula. "You're the first person I've seen on paper who looks like me," she whispered. Another student wrote, "You made math feel like a superpower. I didn't know I could be that smart." Lorraine didn't post about these visits. She never announced them. But word spread, and so did impact. A national map tracked her path under a new hashtag, Chalk Legacy. Yet even as she stitched together a movement from forgotten zip codes, Elmbrook couldn't shake her name. Inside Elmbrook's math department, the rot began to surface. 3 professors, Dr. Kellman among them, resigned under scrutiny, not for racism, not publicly, but under professional review agreements and retirement settlements that only told half the truth. Faculty emails leaked by new hires revealed years of anti-diversity sentiment, coded rejection criteria, and deliberate efforts to sabotage Lorraine's case even after the verdict. It became too toxic to bury. One internal memo read, "The Carson incident will define this university, unless decisive steps are taken. Her brilliance cost us our shield. We need structural overhaul fast." For the first time in school history, a black woman was named as interim chair of the mathematics department. She was and her opening speech echoed through social feeds across the country. "Lorraine Carson taught us what a suppressed mind can do when unshackled. My job now is to burn those shackles." Elmbrook, whether willingly or not, began to change. But it was too late to reclaim the narrative. Lorraine owned that now. And then the discovery came. It began in a quiet research facility in Oregon. A team working in predictive modeling for oncology flagged a new approach to data compression. The model used a derivative of the equation Lorraine had solved months earlier. Turns out the problem she had solved in that dimly lit classroom wasn't just theoretical. It had real-world implications, mapping genetic drift in cancer cells to anticipate mutation trends. A paper published in the Journal of Applied Mathematics and Medicine cited the technique as a breakthrough in biopredictive algorithms. At the bottom of the footnote, one sentence, "Inspired by a problem-solving structure traced to mathematician Lorraine Carson." The word mathematician wasn't used casually. It was deliberate, and this time, indisputable. When Lorraine received a package from the Oregon lab, she opened it cautiously. Inside were lab results, charts, and a letter. It read, "Ms. Carson, you may not know us, but we know your work. Your equation changed the way we predict aggressive tumors. You've given us a new lens. Thank you for seeing what no one else dared to." Dr. Marissa Trent, lead researcher. Lorraine sat in silence. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Because now the question wasn't whether she was right. It was how many lives her mistake might now save. She stood up, walked to the kitchen, and reached into a drawer. Inside, still preserved, was the exact chalk piece she'd used the night everything began. She held it up, and for the first time since that night, she smiled. The next morning, her mailbox overflowed. Letters from kids, journal citations, lecture invitations, and one thick envelope without a return address. It bore the presidential seal. She paused, froze, then tore it open carefully. Inside, an official letterhead from the Executive Office of the President of the United States. It read, "Dear Ms. Carson, your story, your struggle and your triumph have not gone unnoticed. You have reminded this country that the pursuit of knowledge is not reserved for the privileged, but for the persistent. We would be honored to invite you to the White House as a guest speaker during the National Forum on Educational Justice. Please consider this not only an invitation, but a recognition long overdue. With admiration, Office of the President, Washington, D.C." Lorraine blinked, stunned. Amber, who had arrived with lunch, stared at the letter, jaw open. Is that real?" Lorraine nodded, barely breathing. Amber burst into tears. "You're going to the White House," she whispered. "The damn White House." Marcus called 10 minutes later. Lorraine answered calmly. "I got a letter," she said. He smiled through the phone. "I know. They copied us." "You knew before me?" He laughed. "I wanted to let you have your moment." Lorraine looked down at the letter again. "I don't want to go for the photo op," she said. "Then don't," Marcus said. "Go for the kids. Go for the ones still stuck in the system." She exhaled. "Okay." Later that night, she opened her laptop. She created a blank document. At the top, she typed, "Legacy is not about winning. It's about rewriting the story they told about you." She paused, then typed the second line. "Let this be the first page of theirs that we author ourselves." She saved it, entitled the file, "The Wronged Genius." As she leaned back, her email pinged. Subject line, "Urgent. Confirm your clearance for Roosevelt Room briefing." Lorraine clicked it open. Inside, an encrypted calendar invite. Date January 22nd. Location West Wing. Status classified agenda. And beneath it, one chilling line in plain font. "Not everyone wants you there." The room held its breath. Lorraine Carson stood beneath the domed ceiling of the White House's East Room, the Presidential Medal of Science clasped in her shaking hands. Around her, the crowd rose to its feet. Senators, scientists, students, survivors of her story, all applauding one woman whose equation had proven what institutions denied for generations. That genius doesn't ask permission. It simply persists. The applause echoed like thunder. The president stepped forward again, offering a final handshake. Lorraine accepted it with grace, but her eyes didn't linger on the official seal behind her, nor on the polished podium beneath her notes. Instead, her gaze scanned the corners of the room, the security guards in the shadows, the service staff near the walls, the aides scribbling notes beside the exit. She had once been one of them, and they were still invisible. When it was time for her speech, Lorraine walked slowly to the microphone. Cameras clicked. Live feeds rolled. America watched. She placed the medal down gently on the podium, folded her speech paper once, and slid it into her pocket. "I brought something to read," she said, voice steady, "but that's not what this moment calls for." The room shifted in its seats. "I want to speak about what was never supposed to happen." She paused, locking eyes with the crowd. "I was never supposed to be here." A ripple moved across the room. "I was a janitor. I cleaned the labs they called sacred. I emptied trash bins full of failed formulas and unread brilliance. I wasn't permitted to ask questions, only mop the floors where questions were asked." Her voice didn't tremble. "But I saw something no one else wanted to see. Not just an equation, but an erasure." Lorraine looked toward the cameras. There are still young minds told that they do not belong. Students overlooked, talents ignored, dreams discarded, because they do not come in the expected packaging. She paused. The room was utterly silent. "And so today I accept this medal, not because I solved a math problem, but because I lived one. A formula of exclusion, where brilliance minus opportunity equals silence." Gasps. A few stunned murmurs. She continued. "But I rewrote that formula. I discovered that dignity plus opportunity equals justice. And that's the equation we should be solving in every school, in every institution, in every boardroom and laboratory." A soft tear rolled down Amber's cheek in the second row. Marcus, seated beside her, clutched the program tighter. Lorraine looked directly at the president. I thank you for this medal, but I ask you to remember the janitors, still unseen, the students still unheard, the potential still locked behind gate-kept doors. She stepped back, and the room erupted. That night, major headlines rolled in. From mop to medal, Lorraine Carson's journey to America's highest scientific honor. Justice in chalk. The genius that couldn't be buried. She rewrote more than math. She rewrote what genius looks like. Social media exploded again. But this time with clarity. Teachers printed her quotes. Libraries ordered her book by the thousands. Protest signs were replaced with murals. And somewhere far from Washington, D.C., in a quiet campus hallway, Lorraine's chalk marks remained, preserved behind glass. The exact segment of wall where she'd once scribbled her equations, alone, unseen, unofficial, was now encased in a museum-grade frame at Elmbrook. A bronze plaque beneath read, "Here began a revolution." Not with a roar but with chalk. Weeks later, Lorraine visited Elmbrook again. Not to teach, not to clean, but to witness. She stood before that wall. Students gathering silently behind her. A new class of scholars, faces of all colors and backgrounds. Among them, girls in braids and boys with wide eyes, reading her handwriting like scripture. She turned to them and said, "Math doesn't care about your background, only your vision." A small girl whispered, "Is it true you taught yourself calculus in a library?" Lorraine nodded. "I taught myself despite what the world tried to teach me." She turned to leave, but paused. A new door plaque beside the hallway caught her eye. It read, "Carson Wing, Department of Mathematics." She smiled faintly. The institution had changed, but only because it was forced to see what it once refused to name. And now it bore her name. She resumed her speaking tour, but this time not out of vindication, out of responsibility. In Detroit, she opened a math lab for underfunded girls' schools. In Louisiana, she helped build a curriculum for incarcerated youth. In Oakland, she told a room of black mothers, "My story is a formula that shouldn't have worked. But the constants were always love, learning, and resistance. Raise your children with all three." Each city she visited left behind something permanent. Murals, chalkboards, scholarship entries, math circles named the Carson cohort. She didn't start a foundation. She started a movement. And movements, she knew, didn't need buildings. They needed believers. Then, something unexpected. A letter from NASA. They'd begun adapting her mathematical structures to support trajectory models for deep space radiation analysis. Lorraine chuckled when she read it. From janitor to trajectory. She didn't respond right away. She just picked up her chalk and began scribbling again. This time, not in fear. This time, in purpose. And then came that moment, quiet, soft, hidden in the thunder. She was at a book signing in Atlanta. Hundreds lined up to meet her. Some brought copies of her memoir, others notebooks, others stories of their own erasure. Then a girl, 10, maybe 11, waited at the very back. She held a first edition copy of Lorraine's book, pages folded and filled with annotations. Her other hand clutched a crumpled paper. When she reached the front, she didn't speak. She just looked up, eyes wide, and handed Lorraine the paper. Lorraine unfolded it. Handwritten. Smudged pencil. Scattered variables. An equation. Her brow furrowed as she scanned it. Lines that looked erratic at first, but carried rhythm. The girl had tried to replicate one of Lorraine's solutions, but veered off. Then created a new path. It was messy, but it was different. Original. Lorraine looked at her, surprised. "Did you write this?" The girl nodded shyly. I don't know if it's right." Lorraine smiled, eyes dampening. "It doesn't have to be right yet. It just has to be yours." The girl hesitated, then leaned in close.
They don't let me into the math club at school. They say I'm too quiet, but I wrote this on the bus.
Lorraine folded the paper with care, placed it in her own notebook. "What's your name?" "Jasmine." Lorraine held her hand. "Well, Jasmine, let me tell you something." She leaned in. "You've already begun your formula." Jasmine's eyes widened. "Keep solving it." Lorraine stood to hug her. The crowd watched, silent, but only Lorraine noticed. Tucked into Jasmine's sleeve was a small stick of chalk. White, worn, used. Not for cleaning, for writing. Backstage, as Lorraine gathered her things, she looked again at Jasmine's equation, and this time she gasped. The formula wasn't just unique. It resembled the early fragments of a problem Lorraine had never solved, one she abandoned years ago. She pulled out her own notebook, compared lines, and realized this child may have just written the opening to the next breakthrough. Lorraine turned to Marcus, whispering, "She's not copying me. She's surpassing me." They tried to silence her with a broom, but she answered with brilliance. "If you believe genius has no uniform, no color, no gate type, yes. If you believe in justice, and subscribe if her story broke your heart."